Mr. Adler,
Here.
Mayor Carney, here. Mr. Harriman,
Here.
Mr. Jaskowitz,
Here.
Mr. Swank.
All right, first up here on the agenda, I have approval of minutes from our meeting on May 18th, 2022. I'd like to table that till next month because we don't have the necessary parties to approve. Following that, though, I have approval of minutes from our July 20th, 2022 meeting. Any comments, add-ons, changes?
I didn't see any.
No.
Motion to approve as submitted.
I'll second.
Mr. Adler,
Yes.
Mayor Carney,
Yes.
Mr. Harriman,
Yes.
Mr. Jaskowitz.
Yes.
All right, for communication zoning, Ms. Brill.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. I know it's been a long time coming on the project that we are talking about tonight, the zoning code. But did want to update on a few other projects that are going on in the village. We have been undergoing a comprehensive branding for the village. That project is wrapping up. We have a final meeting to talk style guidelines and brand implementation here next Monday. And then that will then go to our marketing communications committee that's serving as a steering committee, and then council from there. So hopefully we'll have something to present, not only to you guys, but to the rest of the community here soon. We are still working on the Uptown Master Plan. The next steering committee meeting has been set for the 28th. So we'll be meeting to go over some of the concepts and talk all the public comment that we got from our pop-ups. And we had great attendance at both the farmers market and the library. And then we also posted it on social media to garner comments for individuals who may not have been able to be present at those meetings. Beyond that, I did want to share tonight that I have tendered my resignation. So this may be the last meeting that I'm with you guys, but I just wanted to let you all know, and was happy to serve in this position. If you feel free to reach out in the future. But that's all I have.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Taylor.
I'm not your biggest fan at the moment. All right, Mr. Jaskowitz, BZA.
We had a meeting last night, and the only thing on the agenda for last night's meeting was an extension of a previously approved conditional use permit that was granted back in November of 2021. They're valid for a year. The applicant was not ready to move forward. There's been a lot of supply chain issues and labor shortage issues, and they're trying to work through design plans and so forth. So they asked for an extension, and after the discussion with the group, we granted an 18-month extension, which will take them through sometime like May of 2024 to give them adequate time to move forward with their project. And that was a project that's at the corner of Alcott and 42. Operation Restoration, is that what it is? So that was the only thing on the agenda that was approved, and they're hopefully going to get started before or by May of 2024.
Okay. Thank you. Mayor Carney.
Yes, I want to send my thanks out to Ms. Brill for everything that she has done in her tenure here in the village. We appreciate all of her efforts and trying to help to bring transparency to projects with zoning. I know I saw the sign for the Hamlet on the Darby where residents can get a screenshot or led to the story maps that she's created. So just all of that couldn't have been possible without Ms. Brill, so I appreciate her efforts on that. And we are going to miss her dearly. Yesterday, Mr. Stanford, our economic development coordinator, and Ms. Sonnet and Mr. Huff, our public works director, we met with First Energy to kind of get a little bit of some backgrounding on removing or replacing the electric lines on Main Street and what that process looks like, because we've always heard that it's very expensive and costly to move the lines off of Main Street and potentially move them back to Bigelow, but we kind of put a phased map together to see like where our concentration should be and what that looks like and the cost, because we know it's a it will be a cost to it, but we know that it is very important for the aesthetics of our uptown and the businesses that are uptown. So we are hopefully going to be getting some numbers back and at least can put that into future, like in a 5-year plan or something a little further down the road that might be more attainable. So we met yesterday with that. Since July, I've met with Governor DeWine's office, just kind of with their field representative for our area, and she reached out to us to make that connection, which was very helpful. Ms. Sonnet and I went down to meet with Congressman Mike Carey in London. They had all of Madison County officials kind of get together for a meet and greet, and then Congressman Jim Jordan came to our offices and talked with staff members, and we were able to give them some of our issues that we were facing in Plain City. So glad that we could get the representation on a national level. And then one project that I'm working on, it's not really planning and zoning or related, but hopefully encouraging all of our committee members in the next month if we get it scheduled. This month is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and there's a little boy that is in the region, and I've since found out from one that's been in Madison County that is dealing with a very rare cancer as well. They've really highlighted the need for blood donation. And I'll be honest, I am scared to death to donate blood, so it kind of was put on my heart to bring this to our town because someone might be in need themselves, and so working with the Red Cross to get a drive for in Plain City at the youth building. So encouraging committee members, staff, and other personnel and businesses and residents to hopefully meet our goal. So that is something that'll be coming up in the next month or so. And with that, that's all I have.
Perfect, thank you. Next up on the agenda, I do have public comment. Just as a note, this would not be related to the public hearing that we have on the agenda for the adoption of the amendments to the Planning and Zoning Code. So if there is any public comment outside of that, I'd encourage you to step up to the podium.
Can it be about what she covered just a second ago?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Can you give us your name?
Yep, Race Robinson. You mentioned something about meeting with Ohio Edison. It's
Yes.
awesome. Did I understand right? That was to move back the lines potentially to Bigelow, or bury those things and not put lipstick on the pig?
We're looking at
That's the only way I can
moving-
describe it.
moving them, because like there's a greater cost to burying, and they even said themselves that their suggestion is not to bury electric lines because if you have an outage, it takes longer for the response time on the lines to get to find where there might be a problem. So that it was their suggestion as well, that they prefer that to have this would be a more cost-effective route.
Okay. All right.
So we're in the beginning stages, so I know that our next step, after we kind of create a phased approach, we're going to be reaching out to business and building owners and talking the process through, because we know they said the last time it was brought up was in 2014, and we thought it was a little bit more recent than that, but that's when you assume something, and so we, again, are having to open up that conversation again. So hopefully we'll get some answers that can better give an idea, and maybe they'll even put in about burying the lines.
Yeah, that's cool. I know we would both be interested in that because it's on our side of the street for sure. So thanks for doing that. What was I going to say? I was going to say something else about that. I'll think of it.
I'm not sure if I understood you correctly. You said if it's not to do with amendments, so if this has to do with the zoning code.
So correct, if your comment is in regards to the Planning and Zoning Code, I'd ask that you save that for the public hearing that will open here shortly for that.
Okay.
And you'll get an opportunity to comment all you'd like there. Thank you. Moving along, nothing on the agenda tonight for old business, so we'll jump into new business, which is next here. This is PZ 22-2, consideration of adopting the comprehensive amendments to the Planning and Zoning Code of the Village and to amend the zoning map. I'll go ahead and open our public hearing for that. And Ms. Brill, I'd like if you could give the presentation we have first, and then we'll open to public comment.
Sure. Thank you, everybody. We do have a presentation. Tonight, I'm just gonna kind of high-level walk through the entire code, each section, and feel free to stop me, Commissioner, as you have questions. But, we have some technical difficulties going on with the front TV, so feel free to turn your chair around if you'd like to see the screen. I apologize about that. So the planning and zoning code is part 11, and that's where it's oriented in the codified ordinance. And within that, there are two titles. Title 1 is the subdivision regulations, and then there are chapters within those. So those cover general provisions, subdivision approval process, and then the subdivision development standards. And then in Title 3, that's the zoning ordinance, and in that, we've made some arrangements to the chapters to better administer the code and also usability. We kind of gave an introduction to the code, and this is to kind of serve as a way to have residents as well as developers or any stakeholders really get acclimated with the code. That kind of tells you how to use it and how to find different things, and that's an improvement that we don't currently have in the code. We felt that was important to list all of those kind of upfront. Then we move into the district section, uses, generally applicable standards, typologies, nonconformities, and then administration procedures, and then a glossary. We opted to have one comprehensive glossary rather than it be split all throughout the code like it currently is. Again, the whole point of the zoning code was not only to update the standards that are outdated in our current code, but as well as improve usability by adding uniformity in the chapters, as well as images and pictures to help explain some of these concepts. So kind of covering this first section of the code, which is the subdivision regulations or subregs. And this is really in there, and it's to guide and facilitate orderly beneficial growth by assuring orderly subdivision of land and its development, and to promote public health, safety, comfort, welfare, and prosperity. So that's really what this chapter is intended for. And like I said, within those, it kind of breaks down into 3 sections. So general provisions, which really just talks about the purpose, and all the kind of technical things. So how do you interpret the terms? What are the violations and penalties if, things are not followed? And then what the appeal process is if there was anything that was needing to be appealed. So that's really what's in that section of this portion of the code. There's a subdivision approval process, and this chapter really just walks you through what that process is to subdivide land. So sets up step 1 as a pre-application conference, so where a developer or an interested party who's subdividing comes in, meets with the village, understands what they're able to do, and really gets a layout of that process before they start submitting any plots or plans. Step 2 would be the submittal of preliminary plats. Step 3 is the submittal of the final plats. And those sections really walk you through what all is required to be in a plat, and what the engineering documents are and what that submittal includes. So this section really walks you through all of that. And then this section also covers minor subdivisions or lot splits, our perk fees, if there are any adjustments to plats, what that process looks like, and then any variances. And then we move into subdivision standards, which really talks about when you're subdividing, here's a list of things that you must consider or do. So that's really what that is. It really outlines the standards in terms of, street widths, what's required for sidewalk standards, lighting, what constitutes a lot, things of that sort. So that's really what is in this section. And then we kind of move into that next title. That's the zoning ordinance. And again, the whole goal of this is to promote health, safety, welfare, prosperity in the community. So again, like I mentioned before, really this introduction, which talks about the purpose of the code, provision, and what compliance looks like. And you can see kind of over off to the side, this is one example of an illustration that we added because we understand not everybody uses a zoning code every single day, and they may not be familiar with the terms a side yard setback, rear yard setback, frontage. So we set it out on a diagram, so if you're really looking at this code, you can understand what all these terms mean that may be confusing. So that's just one example of something we added to this code, so it's just not a bunch of text. within this, there are those rules for interpretation. So it talks about, how do you interpret the terms, how do you interpret the graphics, and the text in there as well. Then we also broke down rules of measurement. So again, how we're measuring lot dimensions, how we decide, how we determine what the setbacks are and what that distance is. And then the height requirements are also detailed, as well as what exactly we're measuring based on your roof form or the building that we're looking at. And then obviously there are exceptions to the setbacks. There's some encroachment requirements that we allow for things like porches and things of that sort that are kind of commonplace. And then height requirements, there are a few things that wouldn't be considered in that, like a church spire is an example of something that would be exempt from those height requirements. And then we move into our district section. So part of this process was to kind of rezone the properties in Plain City to conform with the districts that were outlined in the comprehensive plan. So with that, we took into consideration what the comp plan suggested, and there were some redundancies in there, so we simplified it down into the districts that you see on your screen: the agricultural district, a rural residential district, suburban residential district, the uptown neighborhood district, village residential district, the uptown district, corridor district, innovation and employment, and then the open space, which we thought it was important to add an open space district. We don't currently have one in the code, but we want to make sure that we're prioritizing those things and that parks are kind of made a priority, as well as those outdoor recreation amenities. So this is that zoning map that I talked about. You can see the boundaries there and how all of these districts are kind of applied to properties. We know within this, nothing's ever going to be perfect. There are going to be those properties that are non-conforming, in which I'll explain what that is later on and get into that section. But this is kind of where we intend those uses to be, and this is based on, again, those districts that were suggested in the comprehensive plan, as well as that planned land use map that we have in there. So a lot of this code was really modeled after what was decided by the administration, the community, and all of our boards and commissions back in 2018. So that's really guided this process. And throughout this, we did a diagnostic of the current code and how we're meeting or maybe not meeting those goals in the comprehensive plan. So again, it's driven this whole process and kind of what you're seeing here today. So kind of break down these districts a little further, and we did receive public comments on the document that was sent out. So we were kind of downloading and addressing that as we go. So there are some tweaks that we've made, and I'll call some of those out. This is an iterative process. We're making changes as we go based on suggestions, and then ultimately it will be at your discretion to make that recommendation to council and council to decide. But just in terms of transparency, we want to make sure that we're covering some of those tweaks and things that have been happening. So in the agricultural district, this is really intended to encompass and promote that rural character and then economic prosperity through modern agricultural uses. So we know that's really important to the Plain City community. It was outlined as a priority in the comprehensive plan to make sure that there were allowances for agricultural uses. So we created a district that's intended to do that. So within that, you'll see permitted uses become agricultural. There are some dwelling uses in there as well. You get some institutional uses. Mr. Swank had suggested, maybe adding a bed and breakfast, feeling like that may be appropriate in these areas. So that is one suggestion that we took from those comments and applied. So you'll see that in there. And then the suggestion was also thrown out there for structure heights for agriculture facilities. We had this at a 40-foot maximum. We felt that may be a little restricted, and it might not work for all those agricultural uses in those facilities. So we just took out that height requirement. So that's a change that has been made in there as well, and you'll see. So that's that district. And then you kind of move into your rural residential district, which is to support low density residential development that's compatible in character to the rural landscape. So this is intended to be, primarily a residential district with 1 to 2 unit dwelling uses. But we also have in there agricultural uses being conditional and then neighborhood agricultural as well, as long as it's accessory to a primary use. You get your institutional uses, again, the addition of a bed and breakfast in this district was suggested, but that may be appropriate. So we went ahead and added that in there as well. And then we also looked at that impervious surface coverage. We had this set at 20%, but in comparison to the 25% in the agricultural district, those lots are larger. The lots in the rural residential are a little smaller. So we were concerned that there may be issues if you have maybe a home and a barn and a driveway, that you would hit that impervious covered surface very quickly. So we went ahead and increased that by 10%. Can we move into the suburban residential district? So this is to support medium density residential uses in a well-connected and walkable neighborhood. And where you would see it on that existing zoning map, it would encompass the areas in Copperfield, the Meadows, and then kind of the homes on Lantern Lane and Carriage Estates. So that's really, if you're trying to picture in your mind, what does a suburban residential look like? Think that. So you'll see that this is again intended for dwelling uses, but we've also, put consideration for institutional uses that may be appropriate, schools, religious places of worship, other leisure and recreation activities. And then you'll see the minimum lot size, again, based on suggestions from the commission, was made 8,000 square feet. Again, there's sizable setbacks, and then the structure height being again at 40 feet, which is kind of consistent with all of our residential districts. The one thing that we did change in here was adding that religious place of worship and making it a permitted use. So that's one change that you may see from the document that's published online. We move into the Uptown Neighborhood District. So this is the area, that's that residential area that kind of surrounds the Uptown. So that's really what this is intended for and what this looks like. So it's that pedestrian friendly, well-connected neighborhood right on the fringes of Uptown. Not really much has changed in this district as we've seen it, over the last few months. It's pretty much stayed as it has written. You've got your dwelling uses, your institutional uses, some recreation, small scale retail, and then your services, care services, personal services, professional services, and the like. So really this is where you're gonna kind of see that those commercial uses in the Uptown district kind of fade into that neighborhood district, but it is appropriate to have some retail and services within that community. So we felt that was necessary to add in there. Then we move into the Village Residential District. So this district was kind of a result based on all of our suggestions and the changing of that suburban residential district to kind of create more of a form-based approach to development in the community. So that's really what we have done here. We've applied some form-based standards in order to promote the mix of housing types, the mix of lot sizes, and things of that like. So you'll see this section looks a little different than the others, but still the same things apply. There are standards based on the lot type, in whether it's a multi-unit dwelling or a one-unit dwelling. But then it also outlines some of those standards to kind of create more of that form-based community that really addresses some of the concerns that were the perception of density and how you can avoid something feeling dense on the ground level by how you orient the street, orient the block, and the architecture and the building in those developments. So that's really what we tried to do there by adding some of those caveats, so you can really point to when these developments come in and say, are you doing these things? Does this fit? So again, the dwelling uses are really what this is intended for, but having some mix of recreation, institutional, and services where appropriate. So that's what we've done. In this as well, we kind of broke out those development standards by those various lot types. We opted to eliminate some of the regulations that regulated width and depth of a structure, feeling that may be too limiting. And then as well as, looking at these lot type mixes, in order to accommodate some of the multi-unit dwelling and to not get into the territory where we may have had some exclusionary practices, because this is really one of the few districts where you can build those multifamily dwelling units. So that's sort of what we did. We tweaked some of those percentages in order to make these things more feasible, so we didn't get into legal and litigation in the future. Again, the Uptown District, so this is the core area of town. It encompasses the Uptown core, those commercial uses, and then within this district, the historic Uptown District still remains as an overlay. So the Uptown District boundaries have been expanded to encompass some areas that may be intended for some adaptive reuse. So that's the zoning district. It really kind of replaces and expands upon what's our current B3 district. So you'll see in this, not a whole lot has changed. You'll have your dwelling uses, your institutional uses, recreation and leisure where appropriate, and then a bulk of your services. Commercial services and ground transportation services are conditional in the district, but the rest of those services would be permitted uses. Then we move into the corridor district, which is intended for right now for the area along 42, but we know potentially as 161 develops that it may be applied to there as well. So really what we intended for here was those auto-oriented uses, but we still want to make sure that they're compatible for Plain City, but some of these uses may be incompatible with the Uptown, so they may fit more appropriate in this district instead. Dwelling uses are conditional, so where those may be appropriate, that can be at the discretion of the Board of Zoning Appeals to decide, but in some cases those may make sense. But it's really those commercial uses, the services, lodging, institutional, and light industrial is really what you're seeing here. Kind of that campus style development where, the buildings may be kind of more onto the street. The idea would be parking in the back, and things of that like. So there's development standards that apply to those, what the lot area can be, what the setbacks look like, structure height as well. So you'll see this is a little taller than you'll see in the residential districts, but maybe a little shorter than maybe you'll see in the Uptown, where some of those buildings may be a little more prominent. The Innovation and Employment District is intended for industrial, office park, campus style development, and this was kind of outlined in our comprehensive plan for the area north of Main Street and 42, and as that area kind of grows and develops. So this area will really encompass kind of those industrial uses, those services, sales, and things of that like. So you'll see more larger buildings here, larger lots, and really that's what this area is intended for. Is this will be kind of the area where that's going to be the main employee driver with those larger corporations potentially in these areas. And then lastly, we have what the open space district. So this will really encompass, any park or recreation area in Plain City. We thought this was really important to have, not only as our parks start to expand and develop in the village as more of those become available, and of the area along the Darby. We thought it was important that we make sure that we're carving out areas for open space in Plain City. So that's really what this is for, is open space, government administration, and some agricultural uses. So that's that district. I'll stop there. Any questions about?
I know you talked us through as we went a lot of the changes that we've seen from the last version that we kind of combed through with a fine-tooth comb. Were there other updates to this that would be worthwhile just to review?
It's to the district section?
Yeah.
Really nothing has changed in the open space district, the innovation and employment district, corridor, or really Uptown. The only change that's been made is anywhere that a religious place of worship was conditional, it's now been made permitted.
Okay. And then I know we added a couple other around the bed and breakfast was another call out, right, of some
Correct.
uses. And then you mentioned a couple of the different changes to heights, widths, lengths. were there any other changes that we didn't capture in the
Um,
discussion?
When I get into the uses, I'll explain a few other places where, we made a few changes.
I'll let you.
At a
keep
high
going.
level, that's pretty much all of the changes between then and now, nothing super substantial. Just small tweaks as we really were diving into making sure we're applying this to areas in town and development to make sure it works. Because at the end of the day, we wanna make sure we have a code that's usable and in practice. Because anything looks great on paper, but if it's not applicable, then there's really no point, so. Kind of move into, I'm sorry.
Question real quick, and so I see on the comments, like Mr. Van Tilburg made comments and everything, and so obviously those were today, so you haven't had a chance to address.
I've not had a chance to address his comments. I believe most of them were to the subdivision regulations. So I'll take a look at those, and if any changes are made there that are substantial, I can report back.
Okay.
So the residential district design standards, so we added design standards for the residential district, because we felt like that was important. I know as we are getting new developments, one thing that's really been made apparent is making sure that, they fit and are compatible and are really up to the standard that the village, and residents in the community want to see. So we applied some of those standards for, various building materials, what those can be, garage proportions, how window trim can look, front and rear facade articulation. So we really, thought about what that could be and added some standards there, some of which are approved administratively and then some at the discretion of the commission. So that's really what this section is intended for. And then we added standards for the uptown district with the understanding that some of this new uptown area is falling outside of what is that historic area. But we wanted to make sure that there were still standards applied to this, because as the area grows, we want to make sure it still fits and it's still compatible and it's still acknowledging, its surrounding context. So one thing that council had commented on their last informal review was making sure that there was a clear distinction between what is the uptown district and the uptown historic district. So they only wanted things within the historic district boundaries to go to DRB. They didn't want anything else really outside of that to kind of be regulated by them, and they only wanted the commercial uses at that. So no residential uses for these standards to apply. So that's sort of the little bit of change that kind of happened in the language there. So again, what's been listed in this are, primary facade materials, color, roofing material, door material, curb cuts, building massing, masonry, windows, awnings. We kind of broke it down into a lot of these broad categories again, just to make sure we're acknowledging how these all interface with the street and kind of fit into the uptown district as it may grow in the future. So then we kind of move into the uses section. So this talks about where uses are, the permitted and conditional uses based on the district, the use is not listed, similar use is not listed, and then we also broke down some use-specific regulations. So some of these uses we've added regulations to where they seem appropriate, so I can kind of talk you through what that is as we move through this. So this is that comprehensive use table. I was calling out in those districts where they're kind of listed, but here if you wanted just to quickly flip and say, is the use I'm looking at permitted in this district? You can look at this chart. If there's a P in the column, that means it's permitted. Excuse me. If there's a C in the column, that means it's conditional. If the box is blank, that means it's not permitted nor conditional in that district. One thing that we did realize that we had missed were drive-throughs. In the uptown district, we forgot to put the C there, so they are conditional in the uptown district, permitted in the corridor district, and conditional in the innovation and employment district. That was one change there. In the bed and breakfast category, we did add those as permitted uses in the A1 and the rural residential district. They were permitted uses in all of the rest, the uptown neighborhood, the uptown district, and the corridor district. else? At a high level, that was really all of the uses that were changed. Outside of adding, I believe, agriculture was made a use in the village residential district. The intent there was perhaps there's some agritourism uses that may be encompassed in these larger developments within that village residential district. You know, as we're kind of creating these mini villages, maybe some of those uses might fit in those areas. So that was another thing that we looked at and thought it may be appropriate in certain situations. Mr. Adler, did that address your question?
I think so, yeah, I have it up here, I'm looking at it as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think it did.
So then we move into what are these generally applicable standards. So this talks about performance standards, parking. We added bike parking. As we are, working on multimodal transit and making sure that we are acknowledging more than just automobile use in the village, we thought it was important that as buildings develop, as we kind of grow these out, that bike parking be made a priority. So we've added those provisions to make sure that there are those facilities in the future. We've included in this regulations for off-street parking and loading, drive-throughs, signage, buffering and screening, our fences, outdoor lighting, nuisance. We added the conservation development, which is something that was kind of driven in our earlier conversations and by the comprehensive plan to make sure that in certain contexts, we could potentially have a development that is setting aside large swaths of this open space that we can preserve, especially as it relates to the areas around the Darby. It's kind of where these are, that development pattern would be most ideal. So we outline what that looks like. We get into erosion and stormwater control. We have a resource protection buffer, and that is to acknowledge development and context of the Darby. It sets how far away they need to be to buffer from that area. We also have a wellhead protection buffer. We have it now currently. We kind of just kept that very consistent. That didn't really change much. And then we have tree preservation standards, which we thought were really important to make sure we outlined what those are. I've highlighted parking. Some of the comments that we received were on some of our parking standards, so we're taking a closer look at that, and there perhaps, I think it's just gonna be a couple small tweaks, nothing too major, so that's just one thing I wanted to call out there. A new section to this code that's not in the existing code is typologies. So we wanted to really hone in on some of these applications. So when we say 1 unit dwelling, there are many forms of a 1 unit dwelling that you can have. They can be attached, they can be detached. We really wanted to outline what that may look like. So as individuals, developers are developing, they can kind of reference this section and say, what does the village intend these areas to look like? What are the building forms? We also looked at that for open space typologies. So we really broke down what does a park look like versus a trail versus a plaza. So all of that has been broken down. And then frontages as well as it relates to, porches, arcades, and things like that. Along that front facade, we really broke out where those are appropriate and what those may look like. Again, this section is suggestive, it's not regulatory, but it's to provide some clarification in those graphic representations that we thought were important to include in a code, just to improve usability and to explain some of these terms that may get a little confusing as a layperson who may not be familiar with some of this terminology and using a code every single day. So you can see this is kind of, I pulled out a few of these examples so you can really see the building typologies. We talked about what a single unit detached, it looks as it's front loaded or rear loaded, and then kind of gave some visual cues on what those look like as well. Again, it's suggestive, it's not regulatory, but it's to provide some context as we, say a lot of these terms. Again, how we designated what a green or a trail is versus a park. And then this is one example of a configuration of various porches and how those apply. So we kind of gave that graphic representation. And then we move into the section on nonconformities. With any code, with our code now, with any code in the future, there are gonna be nonconformities. Again, not everything is perfect. And you'll have nonconforming lots, structures, and uses. And this is just to acknowledge that, you know, as things change, as, you know, buildings evolve, that if something is a non-conforming use, it doesn't mean that it's gonna be stopped. It just means that it's illegal non-conforming, and there's regulations set on what that looks like if the use is continued, expanded upon, or modified in the future. So every code really has this section, and breaks it down in terms of what those are. So again, this isn't to say that something that's non-conforming can't persist, which is not the case. If something is made non-conforming and they updated this new code, it can still persist. There are just some standards that are set on what it looks like if it is expanded upon, if it's not permitted in that district or conditional. Then at the end, we kind of outlined some of these administration and procedures. So it talks about what permits are required and when, those approval procedures, what hearings look like for variances, conditional uses, and major developments, procedures for zoning text and map amendments, appeals, the organization of the BZA, Planning and Zoning Commission, and the DRB, which all of our current boards, they'll all retain. So we outlined what those provisions are for those, and you can see kind of over off to the side, we made a comprehensive table. So if you are, you know, you submit a zoning permit and you want to know who that's submitted to, and if there's a board that reviews it, this table kind of breaks that all down, so you don't have to flip through all of that text and try to figure that out. There's just kind of one way that we wanted to improve usability of the code. Also in this section is violation procedures. So if anybody's in violation of any aspects of the code, what does that look like and how we're enforcing that. And then last but not least is that glossary. So really any term that we use, we have to define. So you'll find all of the definitions for a majority of these things in the code at the end where it kind of belongs. And then there's also those graphs and texts and pictures kind of all in there to help explain what these terms mean. And with that, that's kind of the code at a high level. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Could you just, for the audience, because, you know, obviously we've seen this, we've been a part of the process for a while, but could you just, for the audience, let them know how we got to this point? You kind of, you know, touched on it a couple of times, but the steering committee, the consultant that was hired, the comparisons to other zoning codes and communities, and really kind of what drove it. I know you said like the comprehensive plan kind of drove, you know, the direction.
Yep.
But really, how did we get here? So they can understand that we didn't just sit around with a, you know, piece of paper and a pen and say, yeah, I think this is the best way.
Yeah, so it kind of all started, the comprehensive plan suggested that basically we rewrite our zoning code. So that's sort of where it started in that process. And then council made the authorization that we were gonna go forward with this at the end of 2020, at the beginning of 2021.
It was supposed to be during 2020. But then we pumped the brakes on it because we weren't sure of where our income tax would be or with the budget. And so we delayed it. And then as soon as we saw in the last quarter finances of 2020, we're like, let's start getting it affirmed to look into it and started the process in 2021.
Wonderful, yes. So then with council's authorization, we put out an RFP, which is a request for proposals. So we had various firms submit us for proposals based on, you know, our request out there. So what we were looking for in a code. And we ultimately ended up selecting OHM Consultants. So they've been working with myself and others on the staff to really craft this code. Part of this process, we formed a steering committee. So that was encompassed of, I believe, 10 to 12 individuals that served on that committee, kind of helping guide this process in the beginning. OHM also sub-consulted with a firm called ZoneCo. So they really they specialize in writing zoning codes. They are attorneys and other individuals with kind of those backgrounds in planning and law. So they were working with OHM, which really is, our main consultant, and they kind of have helped with the formulation and with that planning knowledge and their graphic capabilities to really help form all of this. So we've been working with both of them. Part of this was, really outlining what the comprehensive plan said and all of these suggestions. So we did what was called a diagnostic report. So that diagnostic report took the goals of the comprehensive plan, and ZoneCo went through our entire existing zoning code and said where we meet these goals, where we don't, and where we could do better. And that informed suggestions of changes to make to our new code in order to better meet those standards outlined in that. So that document was presented to our steering committee. They agreed with, those suggestions. So then we moved forward into what was called a matrix. So they took the districts and the standards outlined in the comprehensive plan, compared those to what our current code was, and then kind of took real life examples of on the ground measurements, and really informed where some of these districts can be combined, where they fit in contexts within the village. And that's how we kind of got into these broad categories of districts. So, you don't see the R1, R2, RS2A. We kind of combined it down into one for simplistic purposes. And because not all of these districts are all that different from each other, we found. So this matrix kind of ran through, like I said, a lot of the existing standards of the code in various aspects and put it on this giant Excel spreadsheet. And we kind of honed in on that to really inform kind of the framework for the code. So that framework, we had various steering committee meetings, and we worked through a lot of these concepts. We refined districts, we refined the zoning map in areas, some of the standards that you saw, those generally applicable standards, and really we've been working on this for about 2 years to kind of get it to this point. As you guys know, we've had many informal reviews with Planning Commission and Council throughout this process to really make sure that we're really headed in the right direction for what the community wants, how the administration sees it, and everything like that. So that's really how we got to this point. Again, it's an iterative process. We've had various drafts and forms, and as we've received comments or suggestions from the community, stakeholders, boards, commissions, we've really tried to apply those where we can. And then in those informal meetings, we tried to address all of those changes to make sure everybody was kind of on that track. So Council authorized at their last informal meeting that Planning Commission go ahead with the public hearing. So that's how we are here tonight, reviewing this code.
So then from here, public hearing, and then there's a recommendation for it to move out of Planning and Zoning's commission to council.
Correct.
And then what happens?
So once it goes to council, your recommendation tonight will be forwarded to council. And based on that, they will either decide to go forward and set a public hearing. They'll go forward and set a public hearing. So that can happen 30 days out. So that we'll be looking at beginning of first meeting in November. At that point, council will have 2 readings, since it'll be passed by ordinance. They'll have 2 readings of that and a public hearing. So there'll be again another opportunity for a very similar public meeting as we're having it right now. And again, there'll be the setting of the public hearing and the reading to address that at council. So at any point, we can address comments and anything until that's adopted. But at that final public hearing, I myself will have OHM here as well to kind of talk through this whole process. But that's essentially next steps after tonight's recommendation.
Thank you. Want to give the rest of the commission opportunity for comment, questions before we open it up for public?
And if we feel that we hear the comments from the public tonight and we want to do more work on it before we send it to council, we're able to do that as well, right?
Yeah, you could table it. To
Okay.
help.
Okay,
Yeah.
just making sure, because I know we spent basically, a year and a half on it here at Planning and Zoning, but want to make sure that we get it right.
So I have a question kind of going on the the zoning map, and maybe I missed on one of the changes, but especially the labeling of the village residential. Is that one of the newer changes that we've had? I'm trying to think, because especially looking down here,
Mhm.
and I know Mr. Swank has some comments, kind of, first, I'll just pick the Darby Fields, because that's one that's developed, was, I know our comments here for the suburban residential, making the lots bigger and getting those setbacks, was basically to avoid those types of neighborhoods were always popping up. And we're showing that as a village residential, which is saying that's where we want these mixed communities, but that's not like the example of what we talked about with the multiple mixed uses of having kind of the progressively kind of smaller to larger lots. So it's in there, and I want that to be the example of, hey, this is what we want to see, because we've spent many hours here basically saying this is not what we want to see. So
Sure.
how
So
do we clear that up? I know that's Mr.
Yeah.
Swank's comment of like, we all know our intention of what we've had of hours and hours of talking about this, but when you look at it, it's like, well, here's the example of what we want.
Sure. So everything's got to be zoned into a district. So again, it gets onto that basis of not everything's going to be fit into a box perfectly. But it was felt that the residential district best fit this community. It doesn't fit into suburban residential district because the lots aren't 8,000 square feet. So it doesn't fit that lot area. But it does fit one of the typologies, or the lots within the village residential district. Now, does it meet that mixed percentage? No. But does it meet that traditional neighborhood lot standard? Yes. So again, not everything is not going to be perfect, but it's got to fit somewhere. But it didn't feel appropriate to place it in the suburban residential district, which would have been the next closest, because it doesn't conform to that district at all.
Right, and that's why I just wanted, like, out there saying, like, this is an example of, it's almost like, to me, on our discussion that we spent here, it's like, that's the example of what we don't want to have, is a million of these communities that are these small pack lots coming in like that, you know, where we said we want that big variety. So that's,
So really what you're saying is when you see this and it's zoned on the map with an existing community, you're taking that as indicative of what we want in the future, right? Am I understanding that right?
That's the impression I don't want to have shown, is that, hey, this is what we, you know, this is what we want, because we talked about, hey, this gives you the free reign. Drive around, look at the neighborhoods, you know, this is where we've spent hours and hours and hours talking about that, so.
When I think that's probably the importance of a nonconformity versus.
And yeah,
Right, like
that's
trying to
almost
fit
like,
for the best, because if you go into that, right, and if it were in the other zoning classification, now if I go to rebuild my house because something happened, my lot size isn't big enough, what do? Now I'm a non-conforming lot.
Yeah.
And have to go through that, so it's more around that than anything, is what I'm hearing.
Right, so the lot fits within that, but as you're looking at a larger development that may come in, that's how we're gonna be looking at it as a whole. But since it's now platted now, what we wanted to avoid was you have a resident that now owns a lot that doesn't meet any of those standards, they don't meet the setback requirements, and then they're told that they don't meet the standards, so they're not conforming, and, you know, we get into that territory. Whereas it fit one of the typologies in there, and it fits some of those standards.
oh yeah, I know that's the
Yeah.
one that fits the best. It's just tough being that like, you know, that's what we're trying to go through, and I think that's kind of echoes, I think one of the comments Mr. Swank even had was, you know, trying to say these are, you know, not what we want, or we don't want a green light, we want a bunch of these
Yeah.
small
Well,
houses.
kind of what we talked about also is it puts a little bit of a responsibility on staff to communicate what it is that is wanted. And then as those developments come through here, it puts some responsibility onto this board to again spell out and define, you know, that we keep saying we want more and we want better, right? We want, not necessarily, I'm not saying more houses or whatever, but we just want more and we want better. And I think that that's kind of where we had left a lot of, you know, those, you know, things that, like she said, it doesn't fit neatly into a box. So it's like, okay, yeah, this is kind of the area, but, you know, we have some direction for you. You know, staff will say, we've got some direction for you as a developer. And then they're not going to waste developers' time by saying, oh yeah, just do what you did in the last 4 developments. And then when it gets here, it's gonna change. I mean, that's not good for the relationships that they're, trying to foster with them. So I think the responsibility does fall, to some degree on them, and then us to make sure that it's, in that standard. Even though it doesn't fit neatly in that box, like you said, and
Yeah.
I don't know how you just rate, we want more and we want better into that code without having a color to shade it and for everything else to still fit.
Yeah. Ultimately, it's two different things we're talking about here, right? One is addressing the existing. The other is when new things come, what standard are we forcing them to, right? And so addressing the existing is what you're seeing on the zoning map versus what we're forcing developers into, which is the code itself. And where I think in some painstaking detail, we've gone through that section, right, to make it what we want and what we feel like is the best fit and mix for the village. I mean, ultimately what it comes down to, right?
I think that's where I understand where Mr. Harriman and Mr. Swank's coming from, because it's like, that's what happened with Madison Meadows. When they first came to us and we approved it, but then this next phase is like, well, it's the same thing. So I guess it's just kind of like, I see what you're saying, that we want to make sure that they're not just looking at that zoning map and saying, oh, this is what we're going to continue. When they come to planning stage with staff, they have to look at that percentage and fit into that.
I think that's why we did this, though, is to get rid of those planned residential districts, et cetera, because everything they were coming with was, this is what we're planning and this is an exception. And now we're saying, no, you have to do what's in the code. You're not coming to us with an exception.
Yeah, and I'll just add, and part of that process of eliminating the use of PUDs was, the village's master planning and guiding development for how it looks in the village. So in that process, in setting a code, you set those standards. A PUD, they're essentially writing what those standards are for you and presenting it to you and saying, this is what we would like to see here. And that's where I think you get, there's not continuity, it's a lot of sameness. And in sameness, you get, it looks dense and there's not a visual variety. And then essentially you lose your identity and character within that. So that's why, again, we could put PUDs in here. And we could do that, but we opted that wasn't the best practice moving forward. So again, that could have been an option. We could have left them as their PUD that they've already written and just put it in there, which we could do. But again, we didn't want to then have to write a standard for a PUD district and make that an option, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the reality is that we have not built our last home that is like Darby Fields. We can't sit here and say we're never going down that path again. We can say we want more and we want better, and we can hold them to those standards, but I don't think that we can just say we're never building that house again. The community, the market, the people will, kind of, I don't want to say dictate, but they'll steer it at least, right? They're going to steer. We can't just say, hey, we're going to build $1 million houses on 80-foot wide lots that are 150 feet deep, and that's the only thing we're building from now on forever. That's it. That's not reasonable. So to provide that flexibility, right? You have to say this fits and this fits and this fits, and then it's up to staff to communicate again to the developers to say, hey, if you want to be on the right side of the Planning and Zoning Committee or Commission, you're going to have to come in with a better plan than what exists. Mm-hmm. And then we have to say, hey, you really nailed it. You hit the mark, or hey, you missed the mark, and you're just not capturing what the desire of the community and ultimately the desire of this commission is. Is that fair?
Fair.
I'm looking down at some of the comments from Mr. Swank, because I want to make sure he has a voice since he's unable to be here due to work. But the one comment about adding trees into the backyard as a requirement.
Yeah, so we don't typically regulate those standards. So an individual could plant trees in their backyard. We really only regulate the street trees and the trees in the front yard because it's something we can see. And at every context, we can't always see into the backyard. So it's harder to regulate those things. So we opted to not add that as a requirement. And in any development that screening and buffering is required, there'll be trees planted in those places anyways. We'll leave it up, we figured on every lot, leave it up to the discretion of the resident whether or not they would like to plant a tree and maintain a tree in the future.
To go along with that comment, like, so say if a field has a tree line in it, is there any way of protecting that tree line to stay that the developer has to work around existing, like, you know, wetlands or things of that nature?
So
In our code.
we do have the tree preservation standards within
Okay.
the code that outlines what those standards are, if there's existing trees and, you know, whether they need, if they're removed, what the replacement requirement is for those. And then the tree preservation standards, I believe, are the last section within the generally applicable standards.
And I know Ms. Parks and Rec is working on this on a tree commission to establish that, so for the village, and then also where the developer would have to go through the tree, you know, to make sure that all the trees used in development meet requirements, in essentially Tree City USA status.
Do we want to open up for public comment and then maybe circle back to any other comments that we want to come back to? So I would ask if you do come up for public comment, please just clearly state your name for us here so that we have that on the record. And I'll open up the floor.
My name is Eric Medici. I did want to comment that a lot of the pictures you have in there and the descriptions, I think that is really helpful for a zoning code. I have some serious issues with specific things in there, but I just wanted to let you know that overall the code, it looks good, and I applaud you for, that's a lot of work. So I don't want you to take my comments as I don't appreciate that. So first thing I wanted to say is how many people in the audience here knew about this yesterday? That's a problem, because sitting in this audience, you have the owners of 8 buildings within 1 block of the clock tower on the main drive. Nobody called me. Nobody sent me anything. I'm on your email list, the village's email list. I'm the police department, the fire department, everybody has my cell phone number. Half of the council members have my cell phone number. I didn't find out about this till 3 o'clock. So if I say something here that's covered somewhere else in the code, I couldn't read hundreds of pages in an hour and a half. I think that's a catastrophic failure of communication. I wasn't asked about anything. I didn't know about any steering groups. Now, I've spent the last year asking for this. I asked Taylor on multiple times. I've asked council on multiple times. The council chairperson 1 month ago or a month and a half ago said, where is it? We need to review it. I was here. And Taylor said, it's coming. Well, it's coming. I've been hearing that for a year and a half because you guys have been busy working on it. Well, all of a sudden it's here and none of us know about it. I mean, that's just a catastrophic failure in my mind. And I brought this up at council meetings, that putting something out on your website or hitting social media is leaving out a significant part of your village, because the business owners here are busy running their businesses and getting their kids to practice and dealing with that. We don't play with social media. I don't even have a computer at home. And I know that's foreign to a lot of people, but you have to do something different. So every time I'm up here, you have to do something different. You got some significant stakeholders in the village sitting here in the audience. And I know I was furious that this was happening tonight and I wasn't notified. I've actually been sitting here having a hard time remaining calm because I'm really, really upset because, well, you'll see why here. So in my hour and a half, the first thing I did is I went for the section that affects me and my properties. and I found your use table. But I didn't know which one applied. There's no legend. So I thought, well, if there's no legend, I want to know what UP is. I'll go to the glossary. It's not in the glossary either. So you want to make it usable, put it in the glossary and or legend where your table is. It's not there. It had in here that drive-throughs are not allowed in the Uptown District. Well, I have been working for 2 years, almost 2 years, on the bank on the corner. And the only question that is asked by every single person who has approached me about renting that space is the drive-through. It's the single most important part of that building. It's in Great Dead downtown. It's in that district. And
She said that was added in, that it's.
she said it was added in. Okay, so, but it's conditional now. So does the conditional part follow the building and the owner, or does it follow the business? Because see, that building is going to have 5 different tenants in it. So if I say rent it to a coffee shop, the drive-through to a coffee shop, and then coffee shop fails or ends up in, for some reason, shutting down for 6 months, it says non-conforming. If it's gone for 6 months, it can't come back.
It's a conditional use, you'd need to garner a conditional use certificate to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Right, so as long as I own the building, do you have that? Or does every single time I try to re-rent it, you have to go up for a conditional use?
It's established with the use.
For the business or the building owner?
The use. So whatever use is within that building that the drive is associated with.
The tenant or the building? This is a multi-tenant building. This is a critical thing here, because if I all of a sudden have a tenant who, like again, moves out and someone else moves in, does that tenant, they're not going to invest anything in that building unless they know ahead of time whether a conditional use is
To
approved.
jump in there, effectively, it's neither of the things you're saying. It's for the use of the drive-through. What is the drive-through being used for, right?
Correct. So,
Whatever the approval was under, right? Yeah.
yes, so if it's a coffee shop with a drive-through, your coffee shop, if you discontinue a use, you have to still get you still have to know whether or not your use is allowed. So you still have to get a zoning certificate for that. So anytime a use is changing, you're gonna have to garner that anyway, so you're gonna know whether or not that use has been discontinued for more than 6 months and whether or not the drive-through can persist or not, or you have to go get a conditional use for that use to be established and associated with the primary use.
Okay, still doesn't answer my question unless you're answering it in a way I don't understand. I own the building, I rent that space to someone. I'm gonna own the building, I don't ever plan on selling it. So does that conditional use follow the tenant? I thought that it followed the tenant and not the ownership of the building.
I think you're saying tenant, I'm saying use. So if your tenant is a user of a coffee shop, that
Yes.
is the use. So yes, it follows the tenant.
And what she's saying is if Tyler is your tenant and opens up the coffee shop and Tyler says, hey, Tom, I don't want to run the coffee shop anymore, I want to sell it to you. And I say, well, hey, I'd love to buy it. Then I can buy it and the use will continue.
What if you wanna buy it and you wanna serve ice cream?
If the use changes, you have to go back through the process.
Okay,
That's what I'm
so
saying.
then again, I'm investing my retirement and my life savings in this building. And all of a sudden I have an unknown. If anyone else moves in there, because there's gonna be 5 separate tenants in this building. Well, 6 including the Historical Society. So if that tenant changes, I could lose that. And this is upsetting to me because I'm looking at a $30,000 bill for upgrading that drive-through. Okay, I don't want to put $30,000 in that. And 1 year from now, having some zoning person who maybe doesn't like drive-throughs in the downtown disapprove the conditional use. So this is a real problem.
I want to stop and ask a question now. Currently in the Uptown, drive-throughs are not a permitted use, correct?
Correct.
So this is no change to where you're at today under the existing zoning code. What
But
we're
this
talking
is-
about here in this.
Grandfathered in. But that's what I'm saying. No,
Right,
this is
and
different.
that's the entire purpose of nonconformities, right, in what we brought up there, right, is it's non-conforming as it is today. If you go to change that use, then it does change the process you have to follow, even under the existing zoning code today.
So it's no longer being used as a bank drive-through. You want to change it to a coffee shop drive-through. Today's code says you still have to go through the.
But I already have
process.
zoning approval for that structure for the
It's
use
not
that
for
I'm
the structure,
using.
it's for the use.
It's the use of that
Right.
structure. I already have zoning approval for that, for a 5-tenant with a drive-through. So does it follow me? I don't have a tenant yet. That's the basis of my question here. I was approved as running that. This is like the North Market. You're gonna have 5 different tenants in there, and you've got the owner of you have the person, actually technically it's my wife, who owns the business that's going to run in there, and she has approval to use that drive-through. Does it follow her, or does, as soon as I get my first tenant in there, does she lose that and it goes to the tenant to have to do it?
Let me ask here, what approval was given for that? Because this sounds like this is a recent change. Yes?
Year ago, year and a
The
half, something
approval
like
was
that.
given for the use. The drive-through was never associated, I mean, the drive-through was on the building, which is grandfathered in, so we can't tell you that you can't have the drive-through, it's already there. But your use was a multi-tenant building. It wasn't, the drive-through wasn't a component to that.
Yes, it was. It's a critical component to that building. So again, that's why I'm bringing this up. I don't want to spend the whole night beating this back and forth, but you're really going to have to look at that. And I'm going to get to why here. They're non-conforming. Non-conforming. This, I'm baffled. So it's page 137, 1145.04. The non-conforming use of a lot of structure may be continued only if. Now, when I read a document like this, if I see the word shall or only, my ears perk up. It may be continued only if. Number one, the non-conforming use is changed to a permitting use. So basically it means, no, you can't do it anymore. Number two, non-conforming use is changed to a use found by the zoning administrator to be similar in definition. Once again, that means you can't do what you're currently doing anymore. Number three, non-conforming use is expanded within the existing structure that it currently occupies. Now, if it's not something you want, why would you want to make it bigger? First, just common sense says, I don't understand. Number four, the non-conforming use can be expanded by adding an accessory structure, garage, porch, deck, or shed, and then it's okay. If it's non-conforming and you don't want it there, why would you say that by enlarging it, this is listed as one of the only reasons you can keep it? And of course, number five, the single craziest thing in here, the non-conforming use will become substantially more in character with its surrounding. Well, if it's non-conforming, you're never going to allow any more. It's impossible for it to ever become more more in character with its surrounding. There are going to be fewer and fewer of them as time goes on. So that non-conforming section, you guys need to take a serious look at that. Now, this is even more important because of a separate piece of property, not the bank, where I have a zoned residential house, and the rear building on that lot has been a commercial building since all of the old people at the Historical Society were in their elementary school. They would go there to buy candies, and there was a welding shop run out of the rear, and was it your grandfather? Father-in-law. So Bruce, in what, 58? When did you say he came to Plain City?
I can't remember, it was somewhere around here.
So since the late 50s, this has been a commercial, heavy engine, heavy equipment repair. So you've got an F1 use, commercial use, on half of the property, and you've got residential on the other. So it's non-conforming. I get it. The definition is great. But when I read, non-conforming use may be reestablished where such non-conforming use has been discontinued for 6 months or longer, or it says no non-conforming use may be reestablished. So, again, I go to rent that out to a tenant, let's say a residential tenant, who wants to store his classic cars in that outbuilding on the back of it. It's zoned residential, shouldn't be any big deal. I, as the landlord, would say, okay, you're gonna pay the rent that I would get from commercial, great. The problem is, if I rent it for 6 months, according to this code, I can never in history ever have it used for commercial use again. I don't see any if, I don't see any but. I see shall and only. So this is a major, major problem for non-conforming property, be it a drive-through or a conditional use, or this case where you literally have 2 completely separate uses in there. And in like 1930, the woman ran a shop out of her living room and sold candies to the little kids, and the husband had a welding and fabrication shop in the back. This has always been this way. But when I read this code, I'm like, I'm up a river here.
I mean, quite frankly, that's the same as the code is today again. Like, these are not new changes that you're discussing tonight.
No, but would you perpetuate them? You put all this work into the code. Why would you have something in there? I mean, this is lawsuit material here. If you went to somebody who spent $400,000 on a piece of property like this, and all of a sudden you say, you know what? You rented it to the wrong person for more than 6 months. You're up a creek. That's lawsuit material. You need to have something that makes sense here. This doesn't make sense. If it's what the current code says, the current code doesn't make sense.
I mean, quite frankly, it's the same as non-conforming, or non-conforming is gonna be in really any zoning code.
Yeah,
We're not doing anything that's new or unique or different with this. And I guess that's what I'm trying to understand is, yes, if you have a property that was historically used for something and it continues to be used in that way for that thing, no one's going to come back to you and say, you have to stop doing this. But if you stop doing that and that's no longer zoned for that use, then it is treated as a new use, right? I mean, we could each look at any of the properties in town and say, hey, at one point in time, they were used for something else 60, 70, 100 years ago. I want to go back to what they were used for before, and they're zoned entirely different.
Yeah. My experience has been Nathan or Mr. Lane would have put me up the river without a paddle. It comes down to trust.
That's
I don't trust.
It's not those person's call, right? And quite frankly, it comes down to what's written in the zoning code is what the process we would have to follow is. And it's applied the same to everyone. It's not for Mayor Carney to say, nope, you gotta stop doing this, right? Or a
Okay.
village administrator.
I
It's
have-
up to the code and our solicitor to handle.
I have an apology letter from Nathan for filing a zoning complaint against me that I had to get an attorney to represent me. It cost me hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars to
Mr.
represent
Mayor,
me. So
what-
my
what-
point is, take a look at it, because if you're
Well,
gonna put this,
what is your suggestion, other than take a look at it? Because like he said, every parcel in Plain City was once used for something that is no longer being used for, and it can't go back to that for a variety of reasons, right? So you're saying that, your property becomes a non-conforming use, and now we just need to discard, essentially, you're saying discard the zoning code.
I didn't say that.
I
said that
I
6
said
months.
essentially, that's what you're saying.
Well,
I mean,
essentially it's saying that I shouldn't invest anymore in Plain City.
All I'm asking is, what is your
So-
suggestion?
Not my job.
Okay,
I've known about this for an hour and a half. I haven't had time to think about it.
fair enough.
I don't know. I haven't ever looked at another zoning code. I'm here to tell you, I see a problem, specifically a problem with me. I'm upset. You have a major stakeholder in this village really upset with this zoning code. So that's my point. And I have one more point, and then I'm going to get down because I'm upset. Historic district. I've talked to this about council. I've talked to this to Taylor. I've talked to this. I have talked till I'm blue in the face. I've been talking for 10 years about certified local government is the only thing that will make your historic district valid. I went through fights with Union County. They told me that the historic district is a zoning overlay. And the person who designated it as a zoning overlay wasn't qualified to make that decision. So they turned down my blueprints. I spent 6 months fighting with those guys. I went to the International Code Council. I had them rule in my favor. When Union County got overruled by the International Council, they took me and appealed it and went to the state and fought me, saying that 121 West Main is not a historic structure. It was built in 1874, and it's not a historic structure, and it's a zoning overlay, so you have a totally different set of codes. I got up the creek again. Because we were not a certified local government, the historic district is not specifically laid out as a district. It's a zoning overlay. So here you're repeating that problem. But it gets better. Page 144, guidelines. Historic district, design review board. Yes, you left a severely neutered design review board in place, but you took away all of the guidelines. You put what you thought looked good in the zoning code as guidelines, but what you omitted was 190 pages of the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines for historic district. That's what's in your old code. You removed that, and under your guidelines, it says, in the old code, it says your evaluation criteria is the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines. It says it shall be used in your old code. That is removed from this one. Now, when this whole thing happened with Marysville or Union County about that building not being historic, I called the Ohio Historical Society to find out what leg do I have to stand on? How can I prove that this is actually a historic structure? I spent 2 hours on the phone with them. They said, do you have a certified local government? I said, well, no, I don't think so at the time. He said, do you have a historic district laid out on a map? I said, yes, we do. Do you have a design review board? I said, yes, we do. I'm on it. I spent 6 years on the design review board, so I'm aware of the historic district and the requirements. They said, do you follow the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines? I said, yes, we do. That's part of the ordinance. And they said, good, because that's a requirement. If you remove the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines from this paragraph, you will not qualify for a certified local government, which you are currently going through the application process right now. They told me, I spent 2 hours on the phone with them, that you will not qualify because that's a requirement. So my concern is that none of the building owners in downtown will be eligible for state or federal grants for a historic district unless you have a certified local government that includes a historic district that's defined, that requires the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines be used as the evaluation criteria. Now, you can't put all that in the zoning code. You can't. It's 190 pages or something like that. So the point is, you have experts on the design review board who have read those 190 pages and know how to apply it. You should rely on them. You should not neuter them by this code the way it is, and you should rely on them. But then again, and I didn't have much time here, I went and I looked, I tried to find where it mentioned the historic district at all, because there's really no place for it. I never really found, I found bits and pieces scattered through the code, but I never found a historic district thing. But when I found it, you changed the number of, and again, I'm going by memory here and didn't have time to verify it, but I think you changed the number of experts that have to be required on that board. It used to be engineer, architect, people who had experience with historic buildings, construction. Now it's more geared towards, do you live in the village? Well, then you're qualified. It only requires 2 people with any education in this environment as part of that board. So again, you neuter the rules on what they use as their evaluation criteria, and then you neuter your people, and it's just a recipe that's bad for all of us here. We're all stakeholders in the historic district. This is important stuff.
Yeah, and thank you. I want to give Ms. Brill a chance to respond to some of that, just because there has been a lot of.
And I don't want to extend this too long.
You don't have to step down, but I want to give her a chance to respond to some of that, because there has been pretty extensive discussion that she's been involved in around all of this.
Okay.
Sure. So the design review board is retaining, so are the boundaries of the Uptown Historic District, which is an overlay, he is correct. It is no different than it is now. The B3 district is the district, those are the standards. The Uptown District is an overlay. We are in the process right now of working through what that is to have the Uptown District become a part of the National Register. The certified local government is a completely separate component that we've not delved in, we've got some information on. So we'll work through that process, but that is a requirement. What we did do is we've identified, and it's been a known issue, that the way in which the design review board chapter is written is very vague, very hard to administer. And so we set out in this new code to retain the district and retain the membership of the DRB because we feel it's important, but define what those roles are and define what that design criteria is. I put up on the screen, and I know it's kind of small, but the section that Mr. Medici had referenced about the historic Secretary of State guidelines. It does state them, but it specifies.
Secretary of the Interior.
Correct, but it says the standards and guidelines are, and it lists those. And you can see in section 1147.13, those guidelines are listed. So again, does it call out the interior state guidelines specifically? No. But does it call out all of those standards that are referenced based on that document in this code? Correct, it does. So those are listed in there.
Board shall use as evaluative criteria the 10 federal standards and illustrated, hereinafter referred to as standards and guidelines established by the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Interior. Shall use those. Shall use.
Correct.
That's.
I think what you're missing here is it's referring to those as standards and guidelines, and down here, right where my cursor's hovering, it says standards and guidelines are, and it lays out those provisions. So
That's not how you read that. That's shall use this as evaluative criteria. That's
sure.
shall is shall.
We can have Mr. Lafayette weigh in on that as our solicitor.
Well, the point being,
our legal
and
expert.
I think you are missing the entire point of that section.
Well, I think the great point that's already been made is, like, we've heard your comments and they're noted for the record, and this process is not complete, so.
Right.
So,
but this
so
is-
we've heard this, and we need to, continue. There's 7 other people.
I understand, but I need to respond to that because you just got bad information. Do you want the correct information?
I don't think that this is really the
Quite frankly,
place.
the information that we would rely on is what Ms. Brill said, is that we would go through Mr. Lafayette, who is the legal counsel to the village. So,
But all of your points are well noted, and we're going to continue to look at this and evaluate the public comment from you
Okay.
and the others,
Okay.
both tonight and again in the future when it
Okay.
goes to council. I mean, this
Okay.
is not a final product.
No, and I understand that, and that's the only reason I'm here. If it was a final product, I would be at home doing something else, trying to take my mind off it. But the point being, she said that it's vague. It's vague on purpose. That's where I said she doesn't understand the point. The point is it's extremely vague on purpose, because those Secretary of the Interior's guidelines, it's split up into 4 totally different sections.
I don't think
and
it's
each
fair
section,
for you to sit and say what she understands
Each
or what she doesn't
section-
understand. And
I think I have the
honestly,
floor. Can you let me finish? I'm not done saying what I have to say.
I don't
Those
think
are
you
4
disparaging
separate-
our staff is a fair position for you to operate from in this forum.
So me saying that she didn't understand this is disparaging her?
It's your interpretation
I think-
versus
I think we
hers,
need
and
to
we've
pause
got
for a
legal
minute.
staff.
I
Mr.
think I
Jaskowitz?
have one more sentence to speak. If you can just
Mr. Jaskowitz,
hold it
let's
until I
pause.
can finish. I'll leave.
We
and
need
you guys
to,
can
we
do
need
whatever
to
you want.
stop and pause for a second. Please finish your comment, and then we will move on.
Perfect. That's what I've been trying to do. So, point being, it's vague on purpose. And I have said this to her before, and I've said it to multiple people before. It's vague on purpose because that guide, Secretary of the Interior's guidelines, is split up into subsections. And each subsection deals with a specific item. One is new builds. One is an empty lot you want to put a building on. One is a historic district where you want it to look like Colonial Williamsburg. It's divided into subsections, and each subsection has its own set of guidelines. That's the whole point. That's why this is vague. The only reason this is here is to just give you like an overview of the intent, but the specifics in the guidelines, it's split up into subsections. So when it says board shall use as evaluative criteria, that's what it means. It's
Thank you.
intentionally vague.
Thank you. Do we have other public comment, questions?
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to do, I didn't know Eric. I don't know Eric. I didn't know he was going to be here tonight.
Could you state your name for us first, please? Sorry.
I'm sorry, yeah, Mike Seibert. But the first thing he said was he would encourage the board to be more proactive in letting the residents and the business owners know of the public hearings like this. I couldn't disagree with that at all. I would strongly encourage you to be more proactive in letting the residents and the business owners know about these kinds of meetings. And I think I would also ask you to respect the description of Old Town Plain City, which is a quiet rural town. And also respect the needs and the future plans of the current businesses. I didn't know that Bruce and Mrs. Lynn were going to be here tonight at all, but it is, I feel, disrespectful and disappointing that things that don't respect the local residents have been allowed. Didn't happen here probably. As an example, an outdoor concert hall that affects a lot of residents in town for hours for 3 or 4 nights a week, every week of the summer. Yet there are certain aspects of the plans here that don't seem to promote the prosperity and the welfare. Those are the words in there, the prosperity and the welfare of the businesses that help to build this town and make it what it is today, like these folks here. So again, strongly ask you to respect their needs and their input and be more proactive in asking them for that. So I'm here to, again, I didn't know they were going to be here, but I'm here to respect the things that they've said.
So I'd like to ask the question, just because it has come up a couple times. How would you like to see that communicated differently? Because it was put out through quite a few channels, and quite frankly, it's not cost effective for mailers to go out to every single person in the village for this kind of thing, or phone calls to go to people. What would be an acceptable alternative in communicating that?
I'll tell you, the same thing happened when a company that I worked with for a long time. That's the same approach that we had. And what the employees said was, if you really want to know, you'll spend the money it takes, you'll spend the time it takes to advise us of things, to communicate well. In the old-fashioned days, there were folks that go around and put something, or they give it to the mailman to put it in everybody's mailbox. Yes, I'm old-fashioned. I don't always look online, but when something comes in the mail, I will, look at it. When I ask the folks in our neighborhood if they've heard about things, no, For them to have to go out to the website and look and know how to look on there and to find this information, I think is not respecting them. I think if you really want their input, you'll do the things that you know you have to do to advise them of that and to communicate. If nothing else, ask them what kind of communication is best for them.
Yeah, and I think to that point, some of the process we did talk about throughout this, right, is really not the first piece of what has happened. This goes back to the original, plans that we put in place in 2018, right? When we did that evaluation, there have been mailers about the steering commissions on it. There have been notifications that I've gotten through email, that I've seen through the application that we have for a lot of different steps in the process. And quite frankly, this isn't the first time we've talked about this as a group either, to where we've had this in front of us for the last 5-6 sessions, where we've had discussions and not had anyone at a planning and zoning meeting to provide any input,
Right.
right?
I think that's where the disconnect is coming from, because to get all the genre, it maybe like this yard sign on different corners so that people could, but it doesn't help the elderly population that might not know how to work a QR code. So, I mean, we do need to do, it's like everything. We're at a point, but then we need to go to that next point with it, so.
Well, that's where we talked, the one point was, we talked about getting like signs, hey, especially on some properties that a zoning change would be taking place, because people need to know, because the requirements, I might be off my distance, like 200 feet, 250 feet adjacent to property, they get a letter in the mail per code. But in our code, we talk about it, and I think Taylor, you said it's required, is, the notification process has to be in a local paper that's widely circulated. And I brought up, we don't get a local paper that's widely circulated anymore. That's the change. So, that's where we talked about trying to put a sign up to help out, because, especially for all the zoning changes, if it's just for, something with the adjacent property, those people get affected, but there's stuff that's really not gonna be applicable for people to come here to, I think for the cost of sending mailers out for everything is a lot. I know there's ways to improve it, but.
Right, I mean, we would effectively have to send a mailer to every community member for every meeting that we have at that point.
Well, if you put out a sign, I like that as a suggestion. I mean, I don't know when the Sunday evening music concerts at the park are until I drive by and there's a little sign. Now I know. I would think if you had a little sign out there, Eric and Bruce and Mrs. Lynn would have known about this meeting tonight. Something that simple. So, again, communication.
Sure, thank you.
My name's Stephanie Seifert, and maybe just to piggyback on that, a sign that already exists for Plain City is right there at the corner of 42 that we sometimes post messages on about upcoming things. It would have been great to actually see that up there for the entire time that it's been posted on the website. Why does that stay blank where it could have said public hearing for zoning updates? How simple could that even have been? And people passing by that. But I also agree with Mike that something right in the center of town too would have been really nice. You see it in Dublin all the time. If they have a public hearing, you see a sign posted that says public hearing, where to go, and all of that kind of thing. I do think that those would be simple things to do. One of the items that I wanted to ask about was in the typology section where it talks about the outdoor patios and the 20 feet maximum depth section. I guess I just wondered, has anyone gone and actually measured what our sidewalks currently are? Because I think if you were to allow, as permitted, outdoor patio space at a 20 feet depth, you would eliminate all of your downtown parking in order to accommodate then an additional sidewalk based on your picture that you have listed, because it goes the patio and then you have a sidewalk that walks down. Well, all the streetscapes that we just made and, had grants and I know want to do the other side, essentially, if people wanted to do that, you would be tearing all that out in order to accommodate these 20 feet max sections to then allow for a sidewalk. There's just no way then you would have any on-street parking whatsoever. And I just wondered if that was something, just an arbitrary number. Has anyone actually measured what is currently there?
Yeah, so it's a maximum, and again, this is widely applied to all patio frontages, so not specifically to the uptown. So if there isn't 20 feet of space to put a patio, obviously you couldn't meet that maximum. But it doesn't mean that in another district that you're not gonna have that 20 feet of space to put a patio. And again, the typologies are just suggestive. They're just to kind of give you an illustration for those. So we wouldn't be regulating that 20 feet maximum. Obviously, it's going to be based on the site conditions.
I feel like though, I mean, we already have one example that the sidewalk did have to then be moved and removed 2 parking spaces. And so I guess that's my thought is I picture that and say, oh my gosh, if everyone was to do that, you're essentially eliminating downtown parking on the street. If people were gonna take that and they say, oh, I wanna do that, or I want my coffee shop that we've talked about or whatever, or ice cream parlor, to have a patio and I want it to look just like that. What is stopping someone else from doing that exact same thing, I suppose?
They would have to get authorization to access the right-of-way if it's in the right-of-way, which the patio you're referencing has that authorization from council.
Sure.
And through right-of-way agreements in order to establish that there.
And what does stop then if somebody else, like I said, a coffee shop, ice cream parlor, somebody else that opens up business across the street and they want to do it? What is there anything that is stopping somebody else from also taking on-street parking in order to accommodate?
They would have to then file that same process of that permit. So what could stop them is that's not granted.
Okay, but not necessarily the code. It would stay the same as the 20 feet max thing or whatever. Just maybe I only am going by that picture that was, maybe I am a visual person. I appreciated the pictures too when that was said. And it's the streetscape with the patios and then the sidewalk in front or whatever.
Sure, yeah, the section that you're referencing about outdoor amenities is in a separate section of the code, which is in the public streets section of the code. It's outside of the zoning code. It's in a different section of the codified ordinance.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Risa Lynn. I'm the business manager for Plain City Animal Hospital. And if I sound confused and shocked and unorganized, it's because I just found out about all this about 5:30 tonight. And my husband would be with me, Dr. Lynn, but he's still seeing patients tonight at the hospital and obviously couldn't leave them to attend. I agree wholeheartedly with the other speakers in their concern as to why we were not notified about this change or about this zoning document. It feels, and it may not be the case at all, it feels like that it is being pushed through under the table and you hope that we all don't find out till it's too late. That's just the impression. And let me say that I do appreciate what you folks are trying to do, because I can't imagine with the growth of Plain City, obviously we have to plan for the future, and I know your job is not an easy one. But that is a very huge concern of mine as to why we were not notified. If our good neighbors, Bruce and Kim is our head tech, and she works for Bruce as well. If she hadn't told me, I wouldn't be here. Still wouldn't know about it. So I so appreciate our good neighbors sharing this with us. So huge concern. And even if you can't reach out to all the community every meeting, I would think that at the very minimum, you would want to reach out to the business owners that are affected by this. So that's the first concern, but obviously a much greater concern of ours is that on this document that I only have a copy of, I haven't even seen the actual document, we are, I assume, fall under animal care with or without outdoor runs under services, and it shows us not conditional or permitted. We're just not supposed to be there, I guess, in the uptown area. So obviously very concerned. I left an office full of shocked staff members, and I just would like some clarification as I go back to them to tell them, like, what's the deal, where are we supposed to move, or what is the plan as to why we are not listed? So I guess I'll pause there to see if there's an answer.
You're not being forced to move at all. You're not changing your use.
Mm-hmm.
You'll remain there as long as your business remains there. Taylor could probably speak to, if in the future, I mean, like, you've changed your business, you've added or expanded over the years. Mm-hmm. Taylor could probably speak a little bit better to, any challenges that you might face through, future growth. I mean, obviously, you're kind of locked in your area. I'm not sure there's a lot of room for expansion or growth in your current property, but you're definitely not being forced out of your property or out of your business. But if there happens to be some change in the future, you find a piece of property on 42 that is more suitable, that you want to either move into an existing structure or build a new structure to accommodate a bigger business, and then you move that business to that new building, and then somebody else, Kim, says, well, I want to start my own veterinarian business, I want to move into your old business, then it becomes a non-conforming use that would not be permitted. But nobody's pushing you out of your business.
Right, that's exactly my next question.
As it's sat for 30+ years, where every client knows to come and find you and has been coming, then what happens? What happens?
If what?
to us?
If it sells, is that what you said?
Yes.
You mean if they
decides to
sell?
practice to another veterinarian, say he
That-
has an associate veterinarian,
Sure,
he
sure,
decides to take over, he
That,
decides
but
I'm done.
the use doesn't change, it's just the ownership changes. So the business would remain right where it's at.
Keeps it non-conforming still, but
The use of that property, the use of that building hasn't changed. So that associate veterinarian that you're talking about will continue on in that business as it is today, as it was last week.
so it's only if he takes the practice itself and moves it elsewhere and we sell to a non-veterinary clinic? I guess that's.
Well, if we use this example, right, it is that use today. Let's say somebody comes and buys it and you guys move to a new property to expand, and they open up a storefront just selling merchandise or something for a couple years. Somebody comes back and wants to buy it to turn it back into a veterinary clinic. That wouldn't be permitted to make that change at that time. Does that help answer your question?
Which is actually not a bad thing for us, because then there's nobody competing with us, but his biggest concern is where he's at, there's nobody in the practice currently ready to just take over, and he would have to sell it as a practice, he would hope to sell it as a practice, because that's where we're established.
And you wouldn't
Is
be,
that
he
gonna
wouldn't
be
be
allowed?
prevented or prohibited from doing that.
I guess that was our biggest.
Right, exactly, because
Yeah.
Obviously, we're not going anywhere now, but that is our retirement, and someday the poor doctor's gonna get too tired to go on. He
We're
works.
already tired of him.
Yes, he works like 65 hours a week or something like that, and he's obviously still there and has been there for 13 hours approximately today. So, but the concern is about the future, that if we were to sell, which we will have to, our children are in different careers, not in veterinary medicine, so we will have to sell to someone outside, and it's our retirement. What guarantee do we have if it's listed not as permitted, that you aren't gonna give the next owner problems as far as taking over in that spot? Is there?
No, because
we
it's
sure
a
of that?
continuation of the existing use,
So-
right? There wouldn't be an issue there, right? There's not a conflict.
In-
Is there somewhere in there that can give us
Guarantee.
that guarantee, I guess is what we're asking.
As long as, as long as it's not vacant for 6 months, right?
Correct.
As long as the use doesn't change or it's not vacant for 6 months, after 6 months, you lose the grandfathered in criteria, I
And that's
guess.
in that non-conformities section, right?
So if you just straight sold it to another veterinarian and they moved in, nothing changes. You just sell, they continue to operate either under the Plain City Hospital name or some other name that they come up with. The use doesn't change.
So
If you close your practice and you go 181 days, then your condition or your current usage expires. There's no grandfathering. At 181 days, it expires and it's gone, and then it becomes a non-conforming use.
So let me ask just one more stupid question then, because say we sell, we are a ridiculously laid out practice. Long, stupid, big hallways, upstairs, downstairs, we lose people in our practice. So if another vet buys it from us, they don't operate for say 8 to 10 months to renovate. Do we fall into that same category of not being open for 6 months? Does that?
If it's owned by
That's a
another
fair
veterinarian.
question.
I mean, if it goes straight from ownership to ownership, it's a vet hospital, but I can guarantee you nobody's gonna walk in our hospital and go, gosh, I love this layout. We don't love the layout, we were just stuck with it, it's what it is.
At that point, I would suggest that that new user come in and file that certificate of zoning compliance to say, hey, we're gonna put an
We're-
animal
we're
hospital in here,
innovation,
and you
we're-
started that over. Yeah,
I see.
that would be my suggestion at that point, just to confirm
I
the
just
use is
feel like
still.
that leaves us with a lot of stipulations when it comes time to sell, and they have to say, hey, look, we can sell this to you, but you've gotta get it in 6 months, or we, you know, I mean, and yes, okay, they still sell it, they still get their money, but what if it screws over the next person? What if it screws over every one of us? That's how we pay for everything. And what if we turn over and we're the stuff, I've been there for 25 years, what if I can't pay my family? And I know it sounds stupid, I know it doesn't make sense to you guys, but it's a big deal. I just,
Where does the 6 months come in? I mean, I understand why it's such a short turnaround, because you don't want business that's in building without compliance, but why couldn't it be at 12 months?
I'm sure we could extend that out to 12 months. I'm sure we could.
I would say, because what if like something, and I don't know the legal size, but if something happens and gets tied up in probate, just, you know, the legal proceedings, I don't know how quickly a business gets turned in probate court. 6 months seems like it, I mean, it could seem like it could go past that period of time. You know, you don't want to get, if something's tied up in a legal proceeding, then all of a sudden to lose it. You know, I don't think that's no one's fault if something like that happens, so. I don't know if there's provisions for extending that time.
That's, if we wanna venture down the 12 months rather than 6 months, I mean, that's a change we can make, I can make note of that.
I just think it's going through, like, trying to get even zoning, like, certain zoning approvals, or having to go to BZA, and it can add up into a lot of time.
what if we end up in another COVID situation, and then nobody can even get to zoning for 3 months? Stupid stuff happens nowadays, stupid stuff. What if he passes? I mean, we lost Dr. Allen. What if he passes and she's stuck in a legal battle for 18 months? It really, it's concerning. And if it's okay, and our use is okay where we are, then why aren't we allowed to just be there in the first place then? Or why aren't we at least conditional of something else? I mean, I don't know.
It doesn't provide much security. You can say, I appreciate what you're saying, and that gives me comfort, but then I look at the document, I'm like, wow, that's still doesn't give me much comfort and much security, and
You know, saying it's one thing, putting it in writing
Right.
is different. That's what she's upset about.
Right.
There's no security there.
Right.
You don't get the little fuzzy feeling.
right,
There's another section of the code, sorry Bruce, there's another section of this ordinance that says in case of fire or severe trauma or something, that there's an extension. There was an exception, again, I was looking through so fast, I don't know where it was, so I think it would probably make Mrs. Lynn, and it would make me feel a lot better if there was something in that non-conforming to echo that, saying that, you know, okay, it didn't catch fire, but X happened.
In case of legal probate.
Right.
Something
Yeah,
along the
so
lines.
I just think, that the fact that it doesn't have any exceptions, that's what upset me the most. And I think I'm obviously not the only person.
Is there a reason why we don't want to have an animal hospital? Why?
Well,
can't
and that's what I was just getting ready to say, I mean, that, there's a valid question of like, what are, you know, how did we come to the permitted uses? How did we define the non-conforming uses? I mean, that I get, and if you can say, you know, animal care and professional services, like, where is the disconnect there?
I 100% understand outdoor runs in the middle of the town. I get that. That would be annoying.
And
We have a
those,
grassy patch, nothing goes out without a leash, without a person with them. If you can change it to say animal care without runs, permitted in that uptown area.
And those are fair questions that I think, I mean,
Yes.
that's the exact reason that this is here, is like, you know, is everything defined properly in the code as it exists?
I mean, the gas station next door to me makes more noise when they fill their tanks than my dogs do inside, quieted, that I can drug. So, I guess I can see that, I can see that outdoor run, I can see the kennels, I can see overnight type stuff.
Right.
We don't do that unless it's an emergency. If that dog's barking that much, her husband's gonna come in at 10 o'clock and call the owner and go, come get your dog, it's healthy, it's well, it's good, take it home. We're not gonna have that noise ordinance if that's the concern. If the smell's the concern, let me tell you, we're one of the best with the smell. So where did it come from? How did we get excluded? Is what I'm asking.
I can't speak. I think that's a fair question. I mean, I don't think, personally, I was just at your office this weekend.
Our parking sucks.
Yeah, the parking, yeah, I mean, I don't want you guys to go anywhere because it's great to run down to the office, so. But, I mean, I think that's a valid, you know, trying to get that.
Do we know, or can we point to anything that says why that particular business was excluded? Not that business, but that business type. How it does not fit in, like similar to a professional service. I mean, if professional service would be defined, what, like an attorney's office? So obviously, you know, maybe there's more traffic in and out of, pardon?
Healthcare facilities, things are allowed in that area. We've got doctors, we've got chiropractors, we've got vision centers. How are we different? I do all of that. I personally do that with my animals in my
Sure.
facility.
Like I would,
Do you
I
have
assume
any-
that would mean like, if you have, again, a kennel,
Correct,
business,
and
but.
I totally understand
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
within the city limits, I wouldn't want that either, I don't wanna walk by and see the mess and the noise, and I get that.
Right on time, sir.
So I think maybe that's, you know, a good takeaway that we can get some additional commentary around.
Yeah, I think
Right, and-
that's something we would want to consider in the uptown as a permitted or conditional use. We can explore and we can add that. I mean, that's why we're here tonight to debate these things.
Yep.
And I would be curious as to why it's left out. I mean, you know, was it purposely excluded, you know, for a reason? And I mean, I would like to hear the rationale behind that before you just say, yeah, we like the business and we want to add it back in. I mean, that's haphazard. I mean, it needs to be done with purpose.
As the code defines animal care with or without outdoor runs, it's a principal use consisting of housing, training, exercising, and or providing medical services for large and small animals, including outside runs, kennels, or training areas. And in that definition, it provides, you know, the housing, the training, the exercising, where it becomes a potentially outside of the medical service.
So
And
you
that's where
spec,
we take issue with it, because we do not provide training, we do not provide housing, we do not service large animal, we do not do any of that.
yeah, and the
So
large
that's why I take
animal
issue
thing was
with
what I
that
was just gonna
definition.
weigh in on. I mean, obviously, if
Right.
we've got, you know, people bringing horses or
If you've
cattle
got
or
a mixed
whatnot.
practice, yes. If you've got a large practice, yes. We are not. We do not provide boarding, we do not provide training, we don't even provide grooming.
So is
under-
that something where we can define the different types of veterinarian services? I mean, like separate them out, large animal, small animal, maybe there's criteria like she's
With or
saying
without
about,
Kennels, boarding, you know.
I mean, if we had a two-pronged, a definition on the animal side, then this could be a permitted use, whereas the large animal veterinarian or with kennels or, you know,
And that's
those,
not reasonable in the city limits, it's not.
and those could be excluded from the uptown
Okay.
area.
So I know our definition here, professional services, just reading includes financial, insurance, banking firms, lawyers, travel agents, engineers, pet trainers, and consultants. So we have pet trainers listed under professional service, but you don't have like veterinary medicine in there.
Yeah, that one falls under that animal care. And we can break it down and specify large versus small. Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable.
It would be terrible, detrimental, because everybody goes to Plain City
All I
Animal.
can tell you is every time somebody walks in our door, especially on a surgery morning, when they drop off a dog, they say, where can I get something to eat or drink?
Exactly.
Let me tell you, we send people all day long, all around town. And we get people that say, can I park here for just a minute while I run over there and get that? And we say, sorry, no, because we can't, but there's parking right behind Lovejoy's Plaza. Our clients are everywhere. They are going to the patio to eat at the granary, they are going to Deer Dutchman. I send 5 people to Deer Dutchman on a surgery morning all the time. it happens. We're bringing people in, and while they're here, they're finding things in town.
And we might be called the Plain City Animal Hospital, and we love to take care of the people of Plain City, but our clients come from Dublin, a huge number, from
Yes.
Dublin, from Hilliard, from
We've
Marysville.
got Grove City. we get
Exactly, from
Orlando.
all over.
Yeah.
And so we're bringing people to town, and we've been a huge supporter of this community, and we really appreciate your
Yeah, and just
considering us.
really to reiterate, nobody wants your business to go anywhere. That's not, the intent of any of this. I mean,
We're just worried about the
yeah, I
visitors.
Exactly.
100% understand where you're coming from, but just don't walk away thinking that we're trying to run you out, or council's trying to run you out, or anything like that. That's 100% not even close to where this is at. So it's not a personal thing against you or Dr. Lynn or the animal hospital itself. This is, literally, like she said, I mean, we've gone through so many iterations and we're trying to get it right, which is why there's a public hearing, which is why you're here, which is why we're listening and making notes and trying to find that right balance. So just walk away knowing that we support and appreciate your business and certainly don't want it to go anywhere. So
Appreciate that greatly. If you're able to make the changes that we talked about tonight to make it on paper that we feel as comforted as we do listening to you guys talk, that would be great. That'd be wonderful. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
and then we will certainly have the, other council meetings, the public meetings, and, I would encourage everybody to, again, engage in those meetings and make sure that your voices have been at least heard, whether changes are made or not, they've been heard, and, and we move forward from that.
I just have a comment on that as far as the meetings and notifying people about them. I have the app. I saw on the app when I found out about this from her through Bruce. I work for Bruce, I do the books for Bruce, I work for Dr. Lynn. We received nothing in email that I have seen, and trust me, I go through the email because that's how I pay most of the bills. I don't know anything. I looked back through the app and did find where it was posted on the 1st. I've never received any sort of push notification on that. I gotta be honest, the app is kind of annoying because it will notify me every 20 seconds when there is a storm. And there's a back to school night, and there was a this, that, or the other. So I scrolled down through almost 15 notifications before I got to that. So
I would say with that, I'm with you. I hate the storms piece of it.
I'm glad for it. Don't get me
There
wrong.
are different notification settings that you can trigger on there too.
This particular meeting was not listed in the latest email notification that came out, which shocked me actually. But it was I actually read through the whole thing thinking, oh, it's gonna be there at the bottom, and it wasn't there.
Every time Tim Dawson does something, I get a letter. Can we just get a letter about this? Hey, you're a business owner. Let's look at this. I love
Yeah.
that. I mean, I read them. They annoy me. I throw them away because I know they're about his business. I read the last one we got about the gas station at the animal hospital because it was next to us. I read it, we threw it away. It doesn't really apply to us. We read them. We do. Just the business owners at least, when it's something big like this. I mean, it was just like getting gut punched, finding this out this way, this day. She told me not to even tell him.
Understood, and I think,
It's very frustrating. I'm like, but I have to, the meeting's tonight, we need.
and I think this group has heard that pretty loud and clear, and to be honest, we don't get any say in driving that, us sitting here, right? But I mean, the parties that need to hear that feedback and make changes too.
Something to them or write a letter, and all of us business owners would be happy to sign that we would love other.
Yeah, and I think-
On the business side, not to
Yeah,
cut
go
in, but, then Jason Sanford, who's our economic development coordinator, he said he's starting a business, newsletter. Are you on his newsletter? Are you getting anything? Nothing.
Is it a written newsletter or is it an email?
He does an email newsletter for businesses, but
I mean,
I'm
I
curious.
know that sounds dumb, because maybe I'm just old school with that. I'm still fighting desperately with our cell phone company to send us a freaking paper bill. I love to file it, I love to write it down, I love to know I got it, I love to put it on the calendar. That's just how it is, so that'd be great, but even email would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think quite frankly, it's feedback that needs to feed back up to council, because that's gonna reside with them on how those get to go out.
And the
Um,
staff.
Yeah, and just to, I guess, give a little more context about this process and really how anything coming out of planning and zoning works, right? Our council exists just to make the recommendations, right? And so what that means out of this is once we settle on what we feel comfortable with from a zoning code, we still have to pass that to council, right? They have to go through the process we talked about earlier And ultimately, at the end of the day, we can pass it to them and say, this is what we would like to see, and they can come back and say no, right? Or the alternate of that is we could say, our recommendation is to deny this, and they can come back and say, you know what, we actually want this, and approve it. And so I think it's important for this group to understand, as you go through that process, make sure you're there as well, right? Part of the public hearing is that, yes, all of these comments are going to be a part of that record, right? And they will have that feedback. But it's helpful to get that in front of council as well, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we get to make a recommendation.
So I like the idea of putting it on the slot sign and then putting a couple sandwich boards in the uptown, but then also, I know it's a lot, but like, it needs to happen, at least to give, like, go here to look at the zoning code so that we can.
Taylor's putting it on the list of what she's gonna make the next person do anyway, so.
Yeah, just an email to the
Sorry,
business owners.
Justin.
I mean, that, at the bare minimum, it would just be something we would get, look at.
Do we maintain that email list, business owner email list that's been mentioned?
Other
That's
than what Mr.
what you
Stanford
mentioned.
has just recently put together in previous history.
Cause he's, what, 2 weeks so far, or 3, that he's been
Yeah, maybe,
employed,
maybe a
so
month
I
or
know
so.
For a month or so.
So we know that is our weak link. We know reaching out to businesses has been that, but
You could run a postcard with just a list of the dates on it. If you knew the date that this was gonna happen, or you know the date that this council is gonna be, thinking about it, you could simply do a postcard and quite honestly, again, from my perspective, the amount of money you spend on consultants to help you write this up, I think that a stamp is not out of line. If you had multiple dates you had them picked out, put it on a postcard, that needs to go out to everybody. That's my 2 cents.
Well, ultimately, we'll leave it up to the parties that need to decide that on how that communication goes. Because at the end of the day, I have no influence on how that communication goes out.
But duly noted.
Yes.
Strongly encouraged.
Thank you, Ms. Lynn.
My CPA wife would love your paper copy satisfaction, by the way. And
Nobody else knows that one.
also work for Midmark, so I hope you have a ton of Midmark animal health equipment, by the way. And next summer, send all those people to the brewery.
Not a sales pitch right now.
What's that?
It's not time for a sales pitch.
Shameless plug. Anyways, I just had one question about the comprehensive use table, so I stole his printout because it was something I want to ask about. So in here, for the Uptown District, there is, in sales, it says commercial sales. And for the Uptown.
Really quick, just to interrupt you and throw you off, can you give your name for the record for this comment as
I
well?
already did before now.
For this comment?
Oh.
Thank you.
Grace Robinson.
Thank you.
So in the comprehensive use table, under sales, it shows that commercial sales are not permitted in the Uptown. But down below in services, commercial services are. Could I get a little bit better clarification on what's considered a commercial sales by chance? And the only reason I'm asking is because we're doing some of these buildings downtown, these historic buildings. I just would like to know where certain things fall. I'm just curious what the difference is.
Yeah, so a commercial sale is a business that is leasing or selling other goods to other businesses rather than directly to the household consumer. So business to business sale,
So like a distributor of some kind?
essentially, yeah. So they sell raw materials, equipment, office supplies, office furniture, commercial vehicles, things of that sort.
And that's defined in
Yeah,
the glossary section.
No, we're the manufacturer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then you'll find out.
Henry Schein, though.
I'm looking right now at the glossary section, that's where all of these broad categories are defined. And
Oh,
a
that was
commercial
defined on
service
there. Okay.
is a use that provides services to other companies rather than directly to the household consumer. It specifies, truck departure rates, so no more than once per day. And examples would be farm equipment rental, machinery, repair services, commercial linen laundering, and then a crematory is considered a commercial service as well.
So would our brewery, for example, in the Clock Tower building, if we were going to brew and ship to distribution, not be permitted in that, would be my question for that one, I guess. Does that make sense? If we're gonna brew.
I think it ultimately there would come down to, is that the primary use, right, of the facility as well, and what it would fall under?
But no, I wouldn't classify that use in either one of those categories.
Okay. Fair question.
Primarily retail too, I mean, are you gonna sell to the public as well?
Of course. Come on.
Primarily retail too.
It's gonna be a party.
We're
Let's
gonna
go.
start serving beer to all of our customers, so.
Hey, I might support you on that. Some free six packs.
Loaded room too.
Some free six packs from Muller Brew
Now a
Bar.
bar.
The cash register, the Grove House used to be a cash register sales. And so basically that's forbidden. Because only businesses buy cash registers. So just so we know, because we both own property right there, I'm not allowed to rent to any business that primarily sells their goods to another business. That's what she just said. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
I think that's how I understood it, yeah.
So it's putting restrictions on our ability to lease our properties.
If they're not already being operated under that use, then yes.
Is this something new? Because obviously the cash register place was there, so is this a new restriction?
The cash register place was, what, 20 years ago?
No, 4.
Maybe. It was.
Tim Dawson bought it off of them. So this is.
Sure, so 15 years ago probably is about when it was in there? Yeah, but how long ago did it start in there, right, I guess is the question that we're getting to, right? Because that's where your nonconformity would come in.
No,
And that's where we have to look
we're
and
asking
see.
because we need to know as property owners. And this, is this something new that has changed from the code?
I don't know
What
if
business
cash
district
register
was it at
sales
the
is
time?
under our existing
What
code in
business
that
district is it?
specific building. We'd have to look at the zoning map and
What is
see.
the district?
Well, I guess my point is it says
So would
She
that be
said that if
permitted
you're
under
selling
B3
to-
today?
a business to business sale, it's forbidden. So
We can look under the existing district for there and see if that's even permitted in the existing. I don't have that memorized off the top of my head to answer your question.
we do primarily commercial business. That's what we do. We work 5% of our customers are residential. So again, that distinction becomes very important. So I guess, again,
Commercial,
We don't need
sales
it.
or commercial services, I guess would be the distinction there as well, right?
sales and
Understanding.
service.
And
So-
there's a scene that pretty-
So I guess the point being that we would like to maybe see some more clarification in the glossary section or explanations of that. So I mean, you don't have to answer all this.
Well,
tonight.
they are in there though. All of these are defined in the glossary section
Well, then you can read. the
with
answer.
descriptions. You're asking what the
I don't
current
have it
existing
printed.
is.
Then you can read the answer if it's in the glossary.
I guess I'm confused about your question. We already defined what the future would be based on how this is written. You're asking what the current zoning code says for how that's currently zoned, right?
Well, there are two different questions. One is, did it change? And the other one is.
And that's what we're confirming.
And the other one is that appropriate?
I think part of my understanding of why this is the way that it is, right, is to encourage more of your pedestrian traffic and businesses in the uptown area, right, versus having those for commercial sales to other companies, right, and wanting that to be in a different section, because one of the pieces of the comprehensive plan is making that uptown area really your walkable central hub for the village, right, and where we're encouraging that. And so I think that that's what the nature of this is trying to push towards is if we said commercial sales was, yep, you can put it in all of those buildings, then you could effectively have an uptown where you're selling business to everything and it's dead from that perspective of pedestrian traffic. So that's my understanding of why this direction was taken for that specifically. Does that make sense? And maybe answer the question a little bit.
In that same sort of thing though, what if there's, say he's doing 50% retail and 50% business to business, does that change that?
I don't think it would be
Front, then does it matter
Right,
if
so
all
we're
of the sales
right,
are
huh? I said
still
B3 Central District, right?
I think
Yeah.
that's
It's
probably
not
a
permitted.
question for you,
I don't
Ms.
see
Bowen. I
anything
don't think you
like
heard
that.
it.
I did not, would you share?
The cash register business was not a permitted use. To answer your question, it's not stated.
It's not, I mean, I'm
in
looking at
B3.
the current zoning code, it's not in there.
So then this is not a change to answer the first
Is
question.
a business to business in the current, that's my question.
That's what I said, it's not.
I don't see anything like that. I mean, if you wanna come look at the.
It
or
was,
Taylor can pull it
it's
up there.
classified in the I-1 district, not in the B3. It's the 503 or 504? That was the business that would apply, or the classification that would apply was a 504. That's not permitted in the current B3 district.
And I don't know if I just use that as an example. I'm more concerned business to business sales.
That's
I
what we
think
looked
that's what
up.
he's saying, that
The
that
cash
type of-
register is, or the business to business
the
sales?
business to business, right, which is what the cash register sales would fall under.
Okay. I
Is
thought
not
you meant
permitted in
that
current code
The
as
cash
well.
register was in that, so I
Yeah.
The
So
business to business.
Just to clarify and answer the first question then, no, this is not a change based on that.
okay, well, that's interesting, because I have never known that.
Yeah.
I
And
could
then-
very easily rent it to someone who did that, because I was unaware that you had a restriction about business to business sales.
I mean, I think
I would
that's-
just encourage anytime, to any business owner in here, if you are looking to, you can always call, our office is always open. It's always better to ask those questions beforehand, because not always is a use that was there before permitted, and you don't wanna get yourself into that territory. So I'll always reach out and ask those questions beforehand.
I made 6 telephone calls to find out what time this meeting was tonight, because on your website, it doesn't say the location or the time. I called the main number, I called your number, I called his number, finally I ended up dialing 100 in there, and I got a woman who helped me.
The planning and zoning meeting is definitely posted on the website for 6:30. It's the same time, the same place every
I think
month.
just to avoid going back and forth on it though, is calling today to get a time of this meeting is not the same way that you would handle calling to get contact on a business that you're planning on putting in there. You wouldn't call within an hour of needing to know, right? And I
No,
mean,
but she
Ms.
said
Brill
that-
will get back to you if you leave a
She
message
said
on her
it
line.
was
I've done
open.
it.
I guess that's my point, is that it should roll over to someone who does answer the phone.
I mean, we
At
wouldn't
some
offer
point.
24/7 planning or zoning support, right? I mean, that's why the voicemail box is there. If you called after hours, you would get a call back.
I really appreciate that clarification, thank you.
It is on the website, the date, with no time and no location, just as a clarification. I looked at it twice at the shop, I thought maybe I lost my mind, so I pulled it up. But the date is there, you are correct, the date does exist.
But not where.
The location and the time does not, yes. So, just as clarification.
on the same page as the date, time, location of this meeting, and the fact that it's a public hearing.
Not on the main page.
Yeah, the one.
Yeah, not on the main page.
So you have to drill down and find all the meeting,
About
find the
the
meeting.
geofogging
You
and
should have
everything.
public hearing notice and the date, the time, the location, and the room.
But it's not where the notice is. It could have
With
been
all the
added.
other public notices. So if you look for a council meeting, all those meeting notices are on the same page.
Well, and once again, general communication, point is, we couldn't find it. So if you put it where the notice is, then we wouldn't have to dig. This is just general
I was just glad
communication.
you said it wasn't there.
Sure, no,
It's
appreciate
not
that.
on the main page.
I
That's
think-
the point. I know it's probably buried in there somewhere.
Noted,
No, it's-
right? I don't want to spend the entire night talking
I mean,
about
if you just
where
go
this
here
is
on the main
website.
page, I mean, just for clarification, I mean, you go here to the Plain City's website and public meetings.
It is,
I mean,
it is much further down, he's correct. There's
You
just a
have to
section
scroll
that says
through,
zoning
but-
code
My
update,
apologies.
that's the time or the day, that's it.
It was more,
It is
it's on the main page for all the meetings.
It is, it does
Everything's
say
on
for
the
all
same
meetings
page.
further down, yeah, I agree with him, it is there, I'm just saying that right where it says zoning code update, it doesn't give a location or a time.
And
But it is further down, you're correct, further down the page.
appreciate that, and I think we've got that noted as well amongst the communication pieces, so we understand that there are gaps in the communication pieces. I think we've definitely gotten some call outs and feedback. Again, we'll let these guys take it away to the appropriate parties, but yes.
Anybody else?
Yeah, do we have any other public comment?
Mr. Van Winkle, do you have any?
I had questions, but,
They've
we
kind of-
answered them with, Lynn.
He was
Okay.
additional, and so it applies assumingly the same if he were to sell his business, as long as it continues as an auto mechanic repair shop within 6 months. It's frustrating even more for him because he doesn't own his building. So when he sells his business, he's selling his location, his business, where people find him and the equipment within the building, contingent on the lease being maintained with the building owner. So it's even more frustrating because if you say, okay, you can't put an auto mechanic shop here anymore because it was only for you, not for somebody else, that's it, then he's selling equipment after he spent all of this time building up his clientele in his location.
But you answered the question.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
I know you wanted to add maybe some things from Mr. Slink's comments.
Yes, I mean, we had questions about, the trees, and then going back again to a lot of topsoil for developers to put back into, residential.
I know that one we've gone back and forth on quite a bit, and I think where we landed in the last discussion on it was that would be handled by engineering,
Yep.
correct? Based on the applicable standards for the development, not as part of zoning.
Correct, it's in that, yeah, it's in the subdivision regulations that call out, but that more specific standards would become into construction standards later on.
Yep.
But it's been noted in there.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, not something in zoning that you can dictate, is what it comes down to.
Correct.
Okay.
But it is something specifically noted for the engineer to look at and say, okay, this
Correct.
needs to be applied. Okay.
Okay. And then Tyler, you mentioned about pocket parks into,
Yeah, there was the one, sorry, I'll scroll up to it. I know it was on the table where it listed in the different residential, it was only in one, but even suburban residential, you couldn't have a pocket park where it's like, hey, there's some spots just have an open lot, why can't that be a park? I mean, that would be,
No, I think
because
that's a great suggestion. We can definitely add that if you think that's appropriate.
I do.
Okay. I have that written down. Wow.
I got one comment.
Oh.
Steve Seifert, plenty of Seiferts here tonight. One comment, one question. When you read the new code, it screams you don't want the current businesses that are there. That's what I feel like. Are you hearing that? We don't know where it came from to say we don't want this type of business, this type of business, this type of business. I understand it sounds like if they sell and it continues as the use, that, it'll be okay, but it certainly feels like you're trying to control the image of what's in downtown and you don't want what's there. So that's my comment. I hope do you see that perspective? That
I think we're hearing
see
a
that.
lot of that tonight, right? And to be honest, a lot of these uses are in line with the current code as well,
Okay.
right? And so it tells me that also at that time, a lot of this conversation probably didn't happen, right? To reflect that, to where most of what we've talked about tonight is really under a non-conforming use in current state, right? And so all of those concerns that have been brought up really exist today under the existing code.
So as a part of this public meeting, are you willing to hear the concerns of residents and then try and tweak and make changes to accommodate them?
100%. I mean, that's absolutely why we're here listening, for sure.
Good. And so my question would be, I'm assuming you're going to make tweaks on many things tonight, sounded like. Will that be available to us to see again? I thought I saw something on the link that said it expires after a certain date. How can we continue to receive this draft, these multiple drafts of this code?
Sure. So what's gonna end up happening, a recommendation tonight's gonna go to council. We have to have time as staff to take all of these into consideration and publish a new document. For document control purposes, to make sure that you don't have an outdated document that looks different than this individual to this individual, we wanna make sure we pull it down and we put it back up. So we can control who has what version, so we're not like, well, mine says this, mine says this. We need to know what's the most current. So that will be made available after all of these comments are posted. When the public hearing is then set, we'll make sure that's up 30 days ahead of time for comment and review. We will take into considerations all of the notes that are made tonight on how to publish that information best, and we will make every attempt that we can to get that information out. With the understanding, we know we're not gonna reach everybody, but we will do our best. But please look out for that information, please seek that information, talk to your neighbors. That's why you're here tonight, so verbal communication is obviously extremely effective. But we will take your suggestions into consideration tonight. It will be made available. We will make sure that meeting time, meeting date is all up on and available on that website. But that's where you'll see all of these changes. So just make sure if you're looking at specific things, because we can't redline it. We're gonna publish the new document as it's gonna look.
Right.
Just make sure that you're just looking for those.
Will it be under the planning and zoning like tab, or will it be on the main page?
Oh, I would check under the planning and zoning tab, just like it is there now. We'll just update that page that was created.
Okay.
So that's where it'll be housed on our website, since it's a digital version.
And to clarify, the new version would be available at the same time of the setting of the public hearing, which would be 30 days before the public hearing, correct?
Okay, so we have like 30
You would have a
days,
30-day period
30 days
to review, provide comments through that forum before the actual in-person with council as well.
Okay.
And just to kind of reiterate, so it's going to go to council, they'll have a public hearing, basically the same process except with council. We'll be here, comments go back in, and then that gets redone and then re-presented to council again. Is that from anything off the public comment for council side, right? If they need to tweak anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it won't go into the reading process until this is the final version, and now we've begun the whole first reading, second reading, is maybe what I'm hearing you say.
The goal is, I think, from council is to at least have it adopted by the end of this year. So in December, we would be able to move it and then start fresh in 2023 with the new zoning code. So that's kind of the thought process behind it.
But the steps are public hearing,
Hearing.
right, and the feedback from that, and then after that, you would have first reading, second reading through that procedural process. I think that was the question, right?
Yeah, but just maybe that's the final version that ends up to those, if you have your comments now, then it goes to council, public hearing, more people come or say something. It's not like they're gonna start the readings, you know.
With what we send from, no,
Correct.
they have to hear the public, and so hopefully by when that next public comment period comes, we can have the additional communication out to everybody.
And just to clarify procedurally, does the recommendation need to occur within the public hearing here tonight, or closing the public hearing before making or having discussion and making recommendations?
I would close the public hearing if you're not continuing it.
Just to confirm, yeah.
And before closing public hearing, I want to make sure my notes are right. Ma'am, what is your name?
Kim Higgins?
Kim Higgins, excellent. Thank you. 2 Gs?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks for keeping me in check. I tried to get everybody.
No, you're good.
Made Race do it twice just for good measure.
Minor.
Perfect. Do we have any other questions, comments, feedback before we do close the public hearing?
No, we just want to thank you guys for hearing us. Obviously, we were upset, so we came into it more emotional.
Understood.
Understood. No, and thank you, we've been staring at the document for a long time, so you miss those details without a fresh perspective, so.
We welcome visitors, whenever they'd like to come and provide commentary. I think it's helpful. We volunteer our time doing this to make sure we're driving the village in the right direction. And so it's important to get that
No
feedback.
matter what it sounds like tonight, we do appreciate the village staying like this with very few empty storefronts and drawing people in. I mean, our business thrives on that too, so we do appreciate it.
This is not the first time that people have showed up
Yeah,
upset
the-
about things, and
the-
we've talked through it.
The
It will
only
not be
time
the
that,
last,
the only time we have visitors are when there's contention, right? I mean,
which is
I'm
fine.
just sitting by myself up here.
yes.
Very, very true.
So every third Wednesday, if you're bored, 6:30.
Perfect. Well, I will go ahead and close the public hearing then for us, and then open it up just to the commission to have any dialogue that we'd like to have.
I mean, I would like to table our recommendation to make sure that we have thoroughly vetted. That is what council is really, like, I think from when they sent back here to do the public hearing, they went basically close to a finished product that we feel 100% that we put. And I would like to, based on the comments that we have heard here this evening and more that might come in, I would like to at least get one more, chance to go over it and finite those items to make sure that we are
Do you,
sending it.
do you think that it's, I hear and understand what you're saying
Sure.
and appreciate it.
But
Obviously we've all been through this entire process, and obviously this part of the process, and we've taken in the comments. Staff has noted the comments. Would it be possible, I guess, again, understanding where you're coming from and what you're saying, I mean, they're not gonna get a final product, right? I mean, council's not gonna get a final product because there's gonna be another public hearing. So I'm kind of like, thinking if we make a recommendation to say, send it to council with the public comment that's been received, and then recommendations from our consultants, our engineer, our staff, our own internal staff, to kind of like close that in and say, okay, here's the public comment, here's what has been evaluated or assessed, and then send the current document with those notes to council and say, this is everything that we've talked about to get it to that point. And then it's up to council to, kind of, yes, we're incorporating this, and no, we're not incorporating that. But I mean, I think that we're at a kind of a point where we've really incorporated like 95% of everything that's been.
I think I'm inclined for a little bit of both, right? And hearing what you're both saying is, I think we've got most of the product there. What I think would be important is to capture one. I mean, we're absolutely going to send the comments from tonight as part of that to council. But, I think some key call outs there that we wanted to address a little bit better were around the nonconformities, right? And that timeline where I think there's two routes you can go there, right? Is one, take this back to OHM and say, what are the general standards that we see based on the other areas that we've identified that we want to be like? Or for us to give a recommendation for that timeline, right? Based on what we think. And really that was around the commentary of, is 6 months the right amount of time for something to not be operating, or should it be longer? I think that was one key piece. And then when we talk about the historic district, there were some key takeaways there to make sure that we are not restricting beyond where we're currently at in terms of the ability for us to apply the correct standards, and also that that's not going to impact, what's in work with becoming a certified local government, right? And getting the recommendation from legal counsel really on that piece to make sure that that's aligned. And then, the other that we talked about was with changing the descriptions for really the animal hospital, right? Or those services, to break that and say, yeah, we don't want a zoo to be getting services up in the uptown area, but we're okay with smaller animals, right? I mean, those were the key things that I had highlighted. Were there others that I didn't capture there?
I definitely, the non-conforming, like getting the language wrapped around that, because what I took away was if you had the commercial aspect in the back and then the residential in the front, because I think, as we're looking for revitalization in the uptown, that is something with the mixed use and how does that fit in. I think the typology, there's questions about the patio and that going forward, so addressing, I guess, that question. I know we have the process of businesses being able to apply for a bump out, and they have to go through that where administration can say yes or no, but just double checking on that portion.
That's through council though, right? In both the existing and the updated code, was my understanding.
It's, the application for, an outdoor amenity within the public right of way is, something that's approved by the administrator.
Okay,
There's an application for it.
okay, so it's not through council then?
Twofold, so if they wanna establish amenity, it's through the administration. If they're gonna wanna add something to a streetscape element, that would have to be approved by council.
Which would capture the patio piece.
Would, that would
Yes,
capture
okay.
the bump, if
The
there
bump
was
out.
an
The
addition.
bump out.
Yeah,
Okay,
right, but essentially if you're gonna establish a patio in the existing area on the sidewalk, which if we're talking in an uptown context, I mean, really that's your only workable area. What's there?
The other part was the drive-through, clarification on that and making sure that that is,
we did add that though, right? Drive-through as
Yeah.
conditional in uptown.
Yes.
Which I think to me is the acceptable way to do that as opposed to permitted. Otherwise, you're just gonna have 100 drive-throughs through uptown and nobody's gonna wanna go through there.
Yeah, I don't know, staff can go through and just verify kind of the businesses that we are existing in, like our uptown district, and make sure that we don't have anything, because obviously we had just a small amount of the businesses represented here. I know there's more, down the road or around, just to make sure that they're gonna be captured, so that we don't have basically another meeting where, hey, my business is going to be affected by this zoning code.
So I'm sorry, what were you saying? To make sure it's
Just
captured with what? The notification or with the, the uses?
Where we talk our uses, just to make sure as, we have them in here to, we don't want to affect anything that would change, just to make sure that it's captured in here.
I just wanna make sure I understand and can bring something to you guys, that you're looking for. Do you kind of want like a list of existing businesses, their uses, whether it's allowed in the new code versus allowed in the old code, and where there might be where those might match and where those might differ?
I think what you're asking for is a list of the non-conformities that.
Probably
would be created with
non-conformities
this.
that if anything happened,
Okay.
and see if we need to
So,
adjust for
I mean,
that.
I think the key there.
Obviously, the vet is I think, a good example of something, and I'll speak for myself, but I think that's one that I don't want to see not be there. So I don't want us to go through and all of a sudden by mistake have something and we do something
Yeah,
to
of
not allow
course.
that to happen.
We definitely don't want that to happen, but yes, we can.
And I think what may be helpful with that is understanding, is it currently a non-conforming use, right? And then also in what's proposed under the new code, is it, right? Because in a lot of the use cases that we've looked at, they're actually already a non-conformance, right? And so it's not a change with the new code, but I think it gives maybe that opportunity to look at it and say, should it be changed to where it's not?
Yeah.
And at least understand what are the existing non-conforming uses, because a lot of what I heard is people don't necessarily understand that today, nor would they. I mean, nobody wants to read through the zoning code in their free time, right? But it's just, there are non-conforming uses that exist today that are at risk of, if something were to change, somebody else can't come right back in, 6 months later as it's written today and put something in. That's the exact same.
Yeah.
and then I think the question was on the sales and the services, that's what we needed clarification on for like future uses.
Well, you mentioned there's in the end of the thing that there was a definition or something.
There is a glossary that outlines all those, and I think we did talk through those ones to where the commercial services were permitted, but the sales were not, which is in line with the existing code. So, I mean, I think there's a couple routes that we could go with this that we kind of talked about is, one, do we handled those administratively to ensure that the concerns we have are brought before council and allow the process to continue to move forward, right? Or do we table and then have to have it come back to us with those updates to bump it another month out and go through that process? I think part of the concern with bumping too far out is the public hearing could fall like right around the holidays, and then you're not gonna get a lot of the, so it's either, do you bump it even further down the road there? Or
And,
or
you
do we
know, really the
continue?
timeline, I mean, and it's accurate, and you know, certainly valid, but to me, I don't, I mean, we're a recommending body anyways. So, I mean, like, to think that we've got the final stamp of approval and then we send it off for yet another final stamp of approval, I just don't think is like entirely accurate. So, I mean, I think, in my opinion, we could make the recommendation to forward it to council with the changes that we've talked about, going through OHM and going through staff and saying, hey, where does this truly fit in? And are we truly evaluating that? And then allowing the public comment and everything that you just listed and everything that you just listed, as long as it makes its way to council, but to say, hey, these are all the discussions, these are the actions that were taken by staff, meaning OHM and Taylor and whoever, to address the public comments and to address the commission's comments. And this is how this is where our current state is. I just don't feel the need to have that final stamp of approval from here, just so we can, you know, check boxes and say, yeah, we did that, or Taylor did do that like we asked, or OHM did weigh in on that. I don't feel the need. I mean, I feel like that's like micromanaging almost, and I don't feel that need personally.
And
It
that's
doesn't
why
mean,
I guess I'm sitting on planning and zoning so that when it goes to council and Justin presents this to council, and I can say, oh yes, we checked.
Check those boxes.
This is what, exactly, and that's why I took down my own notes so that I could write down and hear public comment and take back to them.
Yeah, and so I think I'm with you. I'm more inclined to say, you know, with the changes that we discussed and outline those items, to make the recommendation and making sure that those are included as part of really what goes in that next update and what accompanies that to get to council.
so let me play the other side. So we obviously discussed these in depth. If we say, okay, Taylor, take all these comments and consult with OHM and whatever, and OHM says, I understand exactly what you're saying, but this is not a good solution for that. Is it still okay that that assessment's been made and the determination's been made through OHM and through Taylor to say, yes, we've heard the comment, but we don't think that that's the right path, and then that also be included to council to say, you know, here's the process, right? I mean, here's where we've got.
Yeah, I think it absolutely would.
Because like a lot of times we do, you know, like when we approve developments, it's with conditions, right? And I guess what I'm saying is this, we're not recommending this with specific conditions that will be met. There was certain conditions that are going to be evaluated through the consultant and through Taylor, and then pushed to council to say, this is everything we talked about. This is what you're left with. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I think to me that's the right approach, right?
Yes.
Is to get that feedback, right? When we talk about, let's say, the nonconformity piece of the 6-month time frame, is our recommendation is to have those that are the experts evaluate it and provide that feedback to council, right? And so then
Right.
council's gonna see that we as a body think that needs some additional attention and needs looked at. They'll get the recommendation from OHM, but ultimately at the end of the day, the approval lies with council anyways.
Right.
And so they're able to look at that, and as part of that public hearing is really where you would hammer out those pieces before you get to the final document that's going through readings.
And I agree with everything you just said. I was just a little bit taken, you know, maybe I misunderstood how you said, you know, with these conditions.
Maybe conditions is the wrong
Yeah,
word.
so as long as we know that they're not 100% going to be incorporated, they will be evaluated, they'll be assessed. Hopefully, you know, the ones that work, the ones that fit, the ones that make the most sense will be incorporated. But we've taken everybody's notes and we've taken obviously our opinions and inserted. So
I mean, what I would like to see in that, right, is what we called out. I mean, one is that distinction that we talked about within, you know, the animal healthcare services, right, and having that broken out. I don't think that's one where we look for a recommendation. I think we say, here's our recommendation for that piece.
Agreed.
Right, and then separate from that, where I think we would rely on that recommendation is around the nonconformities, is around the historic district, right? Because I don't feel that we have the expertise in this room to make that final recommendation to council on what those should be. I think we need to rely on legal counsel to provide some of that information, right? And then from there, let that influence how that final determination is made in the document. And then I think an accompaniment that we can have to that is what you called out around the nonconformities that exist currently, as well as if there would be any additional new ones based on the permitted and conditional uses, right? And then you had one that I think we wanted to add to that I'm blanking on right now.
And I guess, and it's probably on the historic side, just, you know, got lost way from the beginning, but just make sure whatever historical building, whatever designation, if that needs to be listed, to make sure if there's any grants or anything that she mentioned. I know the list was in there, like the A through J, but if there needs to be.
Yeah, that's the historical district
just
piece
to
that I
make sure that
mentioned in
piece is in there, yeah.
Can you do almost like your subdivision or like the engineering checklist that you can say, see this, can we put in there, see Secretary of Interior guidelines, just as reference?
I think that's what I'm saying. I would be more inclined to let
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mr.
Yeah.
Lefkow
Yeah.
give us the
Yes.
recommendation
Yes.
there than for us to decide that.
And then, so when it moves on to council and then to see the advertisement of it, that's what we are recommending. So then the next, at least when it goes on to council with our suggestions and recommendations, then at least it gives the public another chance to say, okay, this was the outcome of the first public hearing, and then here's how, you know, can proceed with the second one, but
Exactly. Yep.
I'm comfortable with suggesting this.
So I just want to go kind of just the time frame. So if we recommend going to council with this, with the changes that we talked about, then once council would get it, then there's going to be a 30-day public notice before.
So before that, those updates would have to be made.
Correct.
Based on the feedback tonight. Then once those updates are made, the document is published with the announcement of the public hearing at a minimum of 30 days before council has the public hearing.
Mm-hmm.
That public hearing, depending on the outcome of that, would then drive, you know, does it come back for another one with council, right? Or then do they have a finalized document that they move through the readings to actually codify it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm just, so if we look at the calendar, say it takes a week or whatever it is, let's use October 1st.
Yep.
Just, so then we'd have 30 days basically. So the first time, then the next public comment would be probably the council meeting, early November. And then we would go through, if there was nothing much, that would be into basically December, I guess, when.
Beginning of December is when you would essentially be at the point where council could take their vote, right, on it.
Okay. I just want to go, that's kind of the fast process for this to happen. So just trying to put in our calendar.
Yeah,
my
and
perspective.
just to clarify for everybody's edification, based on the time frame that we need and based on tonight's recommendation, we'll kind of move it and see where those dates fall. I don't want to make any promises on dates because I don't want to set that. We'll publish and it'll be, council will set that public hearing date and we'll move from there. And that's when we'll advertise and get all of these notifications out so the public knows when to show up and where.
Okay, and that's kind of what I was saying, it's like, it's not gonna be something that gets swept under the rug in 2 weeks, you know, it should be hopefully a lot of time to go through everything.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine it's, you know, minimum couple weeks for Taylor and Company to go through and make the changes, right? And then you'd be looking at a month out from there before the next public hearing.
And realistically, the January 1st is a kind of an arbitrary number that's being set, but we have to have a target. We have to have, I mean, we've got to have a goal to keep pushing towards. And I think that this is the right approach to take our recommendations and give it back to council to actually evaluate, so. So, based on that, I would make a motion to, recommend this to council based off of pretty much everything we just said, which is, all those conditions. I don't know if conditions is the right word, but everything, all the notes that have been taken, that they're properly assessed through OHM. And then you can list your specific, criteria. Like you mentioned, the historic district and
So let me do this, and what I'll do is I'll make the motion to recommend to council based on the changes to the language around the veterinary services as discussed, recommendation from OHM regarding nonconformities, recommendation from legal counsel regarding the historic district and requirements, and also with an accompaniment of existing nonconformities and what would be new nonconformities from this proposed zoning code.
In context of the uptown.
In context to the uptown, yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
wonderful.
second.
Mr. Adler,
Yes.
Mayor Carney,
Yes.
Mr. Harriman,
Yes.
Mr. Jaskowitz.
Yes.
And then last point of business that I have, Taylor, thank you for everything that you've done. We'll be mad at you for a little bit, but hope you're on to bigger and better things. I just appreciate the service that you've had. I mean, you've really helped, I think, guide a lot of this process with considering the village and, the community members in that. And so we're absolutely appreciative of that. If you decide you want to come back, please do.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure.